though it's from Liverpool, trying to reposition the party. He announced plans to create a publicly owned renewable energy company, Great British Energy. Of course, he didn't miss the opportunity to having to get the Conservatives after that controversial so-called mini-budget was announced on Friday.
The government has lost control of the British economy. And for what? They've crashed the pound. And for what? We will run towards the challenges of tomorrow. We will get us out of this endless cycle of crisis. And we will do it with a fresh start, a new set of priorities, and a new way of governing.
Let's get some reaction now. Lord Glassman is joining us to give his assessment, a long-time observer and critic occasionally of the Labour Party. But first, I just wanted to get your reaction to what we've been hearing on the financial front about the husbandry of UK PLC and the fact the Bank of England's undertaken these emergency measures.
Well, this is just the unravelling that really begun in 2008. As Liam mentioned, they went to quantitative easing, which always reminded me of a sort of high-end laxative rather than an economic measure, but essentially meant that the Bank of England just produced more and more virtual money. And now the essential problems with our productive capacity, which were highlighted during COVID, are all coming to the fore. So essentially the Conservative government have completely reneged on their election manifesto. There's no levelling up anymore. There's no productivity anymore. There's no agenda for vocational training anymore. And they've reverted to their natural position, which is what you might say free market capitalism. And it's going to fail.
Yeah. So Labour has also made some promises, but they're also based on borrowing. Now, explain this to me. You are a Labour peer, so the Labour Party have said this is reckless, so they want to get rid and they would reverse that 45p tax rate, but not to get down borrowing, to spend that on things like providing breakfast for primary school children. So how can one be reckless, but the same amount of money used for a different purpose not be reckless?
Yeah, well, that's the contradiction that faces Labour at the moment, is trying to simultaneously be radical and quite fiscally conservative. The reality is that all over the Western world, all over Europe and the United States, ever since the financial crash and intensified during COVID, there has been a new type of monetary policy that they've pursued, which involves huge amounts of public debt. So Britain is not particularly exposed in that regard, I think. But there certainly needs to be a recognition that monetary and fiscal policy has reached a certain limit. And we've got to go actually into the economy and start having an industrial strategy, Gloria. That's the fundamental political battle now.
And all this sort of economic financial uncertainty politically, given Labour an open goal, do you think Sir Keir Starmer put the ball in the back of the net yesterday on this?
Well, I think he's put the ball on the penalty spot. I don't know if he's actually scored yet, and that's the crucial thing. Right. Labour has to actually develop a constructive policy that fills in the spaces that the Conservative couldn't fill. So after we left the European Union, we've left the constraints of what we might say Lisbon and Maastricht, which mean we weren't allowed to have a competition policy, we weren't allowed to have an industrial strategy, we couldn't support industries. And now it's firmly on the government, who have absolutely no clue how to shape and define our economic future. And it's got to involve workers on boards, it's got to involve regional banks, so that all the deprived areas have some access to capital. So I think we've got we've won a penalty, but we're yet to score.
You have written and spoken extensively about the need for the Labour Party to reconnect with its working class base, those voters who deserted them at the last election. In fact, you've just got a new book out in the last week. Do you think it is making that connection? Because the difficulty is when we see 17-point opinion poll leads for Labour, we have no idea what the opinion poll lead is in those red wall seats which they need to regain to form a government. National poll leads mean nothing in this context.
No, they don't, and we've got to look at that. So the huge rupture, Gloria, which you well know, having been an MP for those seats, is very ruptured. It's so they're very disillusioned with the Conservatives. There's still a lingering affection for Boris, actually, in those areas, and they think there's been a kind of coup against them by the city, by the money people who are trying to reassert a kind of Thatcherism, which obviously destroyed and decimated their lives for all those years. So Labour has yet to really put together that policy. And as I say, it's got to involve training skilled workers so that workers in this country can fulfil the needs. I mean, the government have also said they're going to increase immigration. And that's part of their policy in order to deal with this crisis. So it's a perfect moment for Labour to actually have a pro-worker industrial strategy.
OK, so let's just sum all this up as you assess what's happening both in Liverpool, what's about to happen in Birmingham with the Tory party conference, and, of course, what's happening on the financial markets and the economy. Will Labour win that next general election?
Well, now it's up to Labour. The ball's on the spot. And he's got a score. Everything is in place. The whole thing is in place. If you think of Labour over a century, what would you say instinctively? You'd say a bigger role for the state in the economy, a bigger role for Labour in the governance of that economy, and an improvement of the places that poor people live. This is the moment that we're in. Only Labour can deliver it, and it's up to Labour to move into that space.
Lord Glassman, thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Well, let me know. OK, see you soon.
We'll give you some marks out of 10, yeah. He's got his book on the penalty spot. We'll see if he scores with it. Thank you very much to Lord Glassman for that. Coming up next, more political reaction from Westminster to what's been happening on the government's tax cuts plans and, of course, what's happening on the financial markets too.
Before that, it's time for your weather. It's freezing.
Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. A chilly feel again out there today. A mixture of sun and showers, but some places seeing a lot of showers. Quite a few of us actually just staying dry and fine. Low pressure is controlling our weather, but it's sitting out to the east and the winds are still mostly coming down from the north. Perhaps not quite as strong as recent days, but still bringing a chilly feel. And this weather front in particular bringing plenty of showers to parts of eastern Scotland this morning, but increasingly they'll push down across parts of northeast England this afternoon and through this evening. A few showers certainly for Wales and southwest England, one or two for Northern Ireland, much of western Scotland, the Midlands, southeast England, though staying dry and bright. But it isn't warm, temperatures struggling to get up to 16, 17, and certainly feeling colder as it turns wetter across northeast England. A grim end to the day in Newcastle and Middlesbrough, and that rain expanding across northern England this evening and then spreading southwards through the early hours across the Midlands into parts of Wales and eventually into southern England too. Away from that little curl of rain, many places will be dry overnight. Some showers keeping going in western Scotland, temperatures down into single figures. So another cool start to the day on Thursday. We start also with a lot of cloud and some rain initially across parts of southern England. That should fade fairly quickly in the morning. And then apart from a few showers coming into northeast England and southern parts of Scotland, much of the country will be dry. And again, we'll see some sunny spells. But again, temperatures will be mostly a little below average for the time of year. But the winds will be lighter. So again, it won't feel perhaps quite as chilly as it has done for the early part of the week. Still a few showers drifting into the Midlands on Thursday evening, but otherwise most places dry until this area of rain arrives in the northwest. That is from a fairly active weather system that's coming steaming in from the Atlantic. The weather front's bringing a spell of heavy rain during Friday and the isobars squeezing together, so it's going to get windy as well.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
And Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to the programme. The time is 12:27.
Let's just update you on this latest situation where the Bank of England's intervened in the money markets. We're being told that the gilt yields, that's the government debt, if you like, that the yields, i.e. the interest the government has to pay on those, has fallen by about 0.4% in a matter of minutes after that announcement. So it does appear that the Bank of England has calmed things on the markets for the moment. But, for instance, Joshua Raymond of xtb.com basically saying the Bank of England is having to apply a plaster on financial wounds created by the government until there's a hint on reversing policy, he said. The question remains, how much further will the bank be forced to intervene further and over what time period?
Well, let's talk to our political reporter now, Catherine Forster. So much turmoil, but what about the turmoil in the government? They say they won't change course despite calls for them to do so, and they might be proved right.
They might be proved right. I mean, it's too early to tell, isn't it? But certainly MPs are worried.
Conservative MPs?
Conservative MPs are worried. First of all, of course, this is a very radical departure from the government under Boris Johnson, a very clear shift to the right and the tax cuts, but coupled with borrowing unfunded. We don't know how it's going to be paid for. We're going to have to wait till the end of November to find out. So, and Troy Grandee said to me last week, this is not Conservative because you can't borrow like this without having a plan. So we've come a long way, haven't we, from straight after the mini budget of fiscal the thing that was anything but mini. Exactly, it was like a bomb going off. Chris Philp, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, immediately tweeted, great to see sterling respond. It went up slightly and then it dived. That tweet later deleted. And now, of course, we don't comment. And they're all very quiet, but obviously a lot of concern behind the scenes. Now, Kwasi Kwarteng, Liz Truss do believe firmly this is the way forward. But the problem, of course, like Boris Johnson said when he was ousted, when the herd moves, it moves. And at the moment, the markets do not share that confidence and some signs, although Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng are really intellectual bedfellows. They've been friends for a very long time. They've been planning this for years, and finally they've got the chance to put this into practice, that tensions between them on Monday, so Liz Truss was apparently resistant to the statement which came out in an attempt to calm the market, saying, look, we will lay out our plans on November 23rd.
Even some reports of raised voices, the Guardian would say.
Well, yes, and that's disputed, but clearly tensions even between the two of them, and they have been seen as much closer as Prime Minister and Chancellor in ideological terms than we've had for quite some time. But I mean, some people like John Redwood, obviously to the right of the party, big supporter.
He will be speaking to us in about 25 minutes.
Oh, OK. Well, just to say, he'd been tweeting this morning. He says IMF and investment banks do not want the UK to be more competitive with lower taxes. Well, that's one way of looking at it. But I think a lot of Conservative MPs are very, very worried. And obviously the Rishi Sunak supporters who Rishi Sunak was always saying, if you do this is fantasy economics, the result will be market turmoil, the pound will crash, interest rates will rise, etc. And a lot of them do believe that. But at the same time, Liz Truss is Prime Minister. they've wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, although some of them are already putting in letters of no confidence.
Really? Seriously?
Apparently, yes.
Well, and that's 2 weeks in, is that right?
Three,
Or
I
2 or
think
3
she's
weeks?
just over
okay,
3
well,
weeks, isn't she? But apparently some letters have.
Okay.
But I mean, that's extraordinary
Yeah.
in itself, isn't it? And of course, she's safe for at least a year. So, but it's just a measure of the fact that the Conservative Party is not a happy place right now.
And would some of that reaction have been because we've talked about the IMF, but not just the IMF, the White House as well? I mean, that must have stung them, that, you know, the special relationship they're going to try and build with the United States. That criticism came, you know, rattling across the Atlantic pretty quickly.
Yes. And obviously, Kwasi Kwarteng is doubling down what he said at the weekend, the comments about, you know, we're going to go further. But all these big bodies advising, oh, have a look again, the IMF, as this is going to increase inequality. This is not the right time for massive borrowing, tax cuts. It's very worrying, but I mean, they've sort of painted themselves into a corner now because they've gone all out for this. If they change, if they moderate, if they back down, that will look like weakness. But at the same time, will the market stabilise? Possibly, probably, who knows? But it is a gamble. And I know Kwasi Kwarteng said the gamble would be to do nothing. We can't go on as we are.
Because the growth was so sclerotic, as they said, yeah.
But change is hard, and this degree of change, and also it's not that we've had an election and they've come in on a mandate that they've promised these things. She promised these things to get elected by the Conservative Party membership, which is very different to the public. And, well, we had a poll yesterday, didn't we? It's only one poll, but doesn't seem to be going down terribly well around the country.
Yeah. 3 weeks in, who'd have believed it?
And what a week next week. And they're all off to Birmingham, aren't they?
Next week?
Birmingham, we see Liz Truss, we'll see Kwasi Kwarteng, we'll see all those Conservative Party members. It'll be really interesting because you just expect a honeymoon when you get a new leader, new Prime Minister.
You do. No evidence of a honeymoon at all, is there?
Even between those two, no. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up, more reaction, of course, to all that, but let's get an update too on the news headlines now.
Well, good afternoon. 12:33 here on GB News. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Bank of England has announced emergency measures in a bid to stabilise currency and debt markets. The bank says if dysfunction in the market continues or worsens, then there will be material risk to the UK's financial stability. The Treasury says the government will continue to work closely with the bank following what they called significant volatility in recent days. The Chancellor's met with investment banks this morning to try and reassure them of his economic plan. The meeting comes as the International Monetary Fund criticised Kwasi Kwarteng's tax-cutting mini-budget. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is calling on Mr Kwarteng to make an emergency statement. Food inflation's hit its highest rate on record, with shoppers now paying 10.6% more than they were a year ago. Analysis by Kantar shows the average annual spend on grocery shopping will rise by over £530 if consumers buy the same products as last year. Prices have been driven up by war in Ukraine, which continues to increase the cost of animal feed, fertiliser and vegetable oil. Northern Ireland ministers have held talks for the first time since the cabinet reshuffle in an attempt to establish a power-sharing agreement instalment. Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris and the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney met at Hillsborough Castle this morning to try to rebuild the partnership that splintered the Irish government. The aim is to find an agreement by the end of next month, which will allow an executive to be formed and a devolved government to function again in Northern Ireland. The public are being urged to get a flu and COVID vaccine ahead of what experts are calling a difficult winter of respiratory viruses. The UK Health Security Agency has issued warnings of a flu spike following 2 winters mostly spent indoors because of the pandemic. Around 33 million people in England will be eligible for a free flu vaccine this year, whilst around 26 million will be able to get the autumn COVID booster. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Newsday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales
And Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
So, as we're hearing in the news bulletin with Rosie, the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney holding talks with Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris this morning at Hillsborough Castle.
The meeting focused on rebuilding a partnership between the two governments.
Well, let's go to our GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who's outside Hillsborough Castle. A lot on the agenda there, Dougie.
Very much so, and it was a very managed press conference. Only certain members of the media were told of it. Only certain members of the media were allowed to ask questions in it. They are really looking at putting pressure here on the DUP. It is their first outing together, and the DUP are not very happy at it, nor are many other unionists. They are saying, and I quote a statement that was sent to me just after the press conference, "We want the Northern Ireland Assembly restored. The government needs to get on with the protocol bill. The longer it is delayed, they are only delaying a solution to the protocol problems. They should expedite it." Well, that's not their line that Chris Heaton-Harris seems to be travelling with them. They have said quite clearly there will be elections by the 28th of October. The DUP have said that they were wanting that bill, the protocol bill, you will remember that, put through, and that would actually unlock the Northern Ireland Assembly and bring back the institutions. This morning might actually put a bit more pressure where it shouldn't be. Simon Coveney saying that there could be some other way around it rather than the protocol being fixed. He answered one of the other journalists there that there would be no fixing of the protocol by the end of October. So all of this is putting pressure on the Northern Ireland public during a time when we have a cost of living crisis. But it must be said that the cost of living crisis is really being solved or addressed in Westminster, not in regional assemblies. So when he left here just a few moments ago, I managed to get a word with the TUV leader, who's saying that basically they are not against going back into the Northern Ireland Assembly. What they don't want is the Northern Ireland Executive up and running. So there might be a bit of landing room there, you never know where it's going, but not a good go for Simon Coveney and Chris Heaton-Harris, especially I alluded to this back in February, that it was almost saying that there would be some sort of stewardship here. If you read into what they're saying that they could have some sort of joint authority. And of course, I referred to that back in February when we would go back to, from the Good Friday Agreement, we would go back to the All-Ireland Agreement that was in place. But they're both saying they're going to try and pick up the Good Friday Agreement. But of course, the Good Friday Agreement only happened because of one statement that was made by the British and Irish government. And it said, and both of them had to sign it, that the British and Irish government said that they had no selfish financial or strategic interest in Northern Ireland. In other words, they were both neutral brokers in this. That is now not the case because Europe wants the single market protected. And of course, that gives a strategic interest inside Northern Ireland.
Doogie, thank you. We will see if they can get that Northern Ireland government back up and working again soon. We'll talk to you, no doubt, lots more about that in the coming weeks.
Lawnmower working there by the sound of it, or the leaf clearer, or whatever they had going there. Anyway, well done, Doogie, to keep going on with all that noise.
Now, food prices soared by a record 10.6% this month as the continuing war in Ukraine has driven up the costs of staples. That includes things like pasta, margarine. And as the cost of living crisis rumbles on, it's not just the cost of food, which is impacting households and businesses across the UK.
Yes, because housing prices, mortgages, rents also still on the up. A number of lenders pulling mortgage deals. Indeed, we understand today 935 fewer mortgage products on the market than yesterday. And of course, all those rates on fixed mortgages being ended too in response to the falling pound and forecasts of yet more higher interest rates. So what does it mean for the British people living on the breadline or simply struggling to pay the mortgage on their homes?
Helen Barnard joins us now, the Deputy Director at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, as a social change organisation working to solve UK poverty. Helen, good to see you today. The government are insistent that the plans they put in place last Friday will lead to growth, will help all families in the end. Shouldn't we give them a chance?
So I think there are probably two issues. So one is, obviously, we don't know whether what they've done will lead to growth. I think at the very least, the jury is out, and there is a lot of scepticism around. But actually, more importantly, even if it works, it's going to take time. It's going to take a year or two. And the people we're worried about on low incomes haven't got that time. So what we're seeing is that people on low incomes are facing this winter a several £100 gap between the costs that are rising and where their incomes are. And so, this isn't about theory. This is about real people who are saying we're not going to be able to heat our homes, pay our bills, afford food and essentials. We're seeing the bills rack up. We're seeing debt rack up. And actually, the government needed to step in immediately to help those people who are facing the greatest hardship get through this winter and make sure that next year people can actually survive healthily. And so far, they haven't done that yet.
And what state are the safety nets, if we can call them, the food banks and the charitable organisations? How are they shaping up to face what could be quite a hard winter?
Well, people are incredibly worried. So when we think about safety net, you've got the social security safety net, but that has been eroded massively in the last decade. So rates are at a 40-year low at a point where prices are at a 40-year high. And then, as you say, we've got food banks, we've got baby banks, we've got debt advice charities, all of whom are actually facing a kind of triple whammy because they've got demand for their services shooting up because people are struggling. They are facing higher costs, so they are facing the costs of energy, petrol for volunteers, all those things. And they're also facing quite often a squeeze on income and donations because donations to charity tend to track with overall kind of consumer spending and confidence. So we've seen in the last few years, actually, that charities have lost a lot of income because people have not felt able to give, to donate. So they're kind of stuck in this position. They can see the need in their communities without having the resources to actually be able to meet it in many cases.
But Helen, there were calls as soon as the energy prices started to rise and predictions were horrific and we were all so alarmed. So there were calls for the government to step in and introduce a cap. They have done so. And for the more vulnerable people on universal credit, pension credit, they will get even more help with their bills. I mean, what more could the government do?
Well, there's a couple of things. So the energy cap, what that's done, of course, it's fixed the prices kind of where they are now. So we're not going to see that enormous rise. But where they are now is still double to how they were a year ago. And it is still, for people on the lowest incomes, the cap has fixed them at a price that is unaffordable on their income. What we then had, of course, was back in May, we had this package of support, which was one-off payments to people. And actually, there's been some research done to say, well, what happened to those payments? And the majority of people saw those payments go immediately on food, actually. So they aren't enough to last people through the winter. So when we did some analysis to say, well, where are we at with all these different things? what we found is when you factor everything in together, the people on the lowest incomes are still about £450 short of what they need to cover the essentials. So what we need is the government to step in, plug that gap. And also, of course, the support for people on low incomes, it was one-off payments. Now, we had the previous Chancellor committed to raising benefits next year in line with inflation. We haven't actually heard from this government what their commitment is for people on the lowest incomes this winter and next year. And people are living in fear. I mean, I think it's hard to overstate just how worried people are because, you know, we saw back in May, 7 million people had gone without an essential in the previous month.
Yeah,
4.5 million already in arrears. That's back in May. Things are much worse now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how far up the sort of socio-economic scale do these problems go? We often obviously talk about those who are without jobs or they've lost their jobs and the very poorest. But I mean, are we getting indications even those who are in jobs and working and getting, you know, regular payments are struggling really badly as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's always worth remembering that when you look at poverty in this country, for quite a long time now, the majority of people in poverty are now in working households. So that kind of the old idea that poverty was all about worklessness, that's changed in the last 20 years, actually. So you've got lots of people who are either they're working, but they're in low paid, insecure jobs, or they are disabled, they're caring for someone who's disabled, they've got a very young child. So they either can't work at all or can't work very many hours. So those people are really, really struggling. And some of the people who maybe were a bit higher up, who were kind of just about staying balanced, some of those people are also finding that the level of price rises is kind of pulling them away from what they can cope with. But it is the people, that bottom 20% or so, who are, many of them are in working households, they are facing just incredibly serious hardship this winter.
Just final point to you, because you have criticised government policy. I haven't heard the Labour Party, and I'm pretty sure they haven't, say anything about the level of benefits under a Labour government.
I mean, I have to say, I've been more focused on what is going to happen for people in reality this winter at the moment. And that is in the gift of this government. I mean, I think you're right. I think what we would like to see is all political parties actually commit to saying we will link benefits to the actual cost of essentials. So we should say, look, there's a minimum amount of support that we will give people if they aren't able to earn enough for some reason. And that should actually be linked to how much you need to cover the essentials. Now, that link hasn't been there actually for a long time. I think all parties should commit to restoring it so that, you know, all of us, you never know, do you? If you're going to get ill, if your partner becomes disabled, if you're going to lose your job or lose your hours, we should all be able to rely on that system to help us stay, you know, kind of afloat. And that means committing to it being at an adequate level. So I'd like to see all parties do that this autumn.
Our Deputy Director at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, thanks for joining us here on GB Newsday.
Thank you.
Well, potential house buyers are rushing to secure mortgages before a predicted rise in interest rates.
Yes, it comes, of course, after the Bank of England said it would not hesitate to hike rates after the pound hit those record lows. In fact, we're learning from former Deputy Governor that he's expecting that next meeting to actually address higher rates once more.
Serena is a 20...
But with some lenders clawing back mortgage deals for new customers, how easy will it be to buy a new property? Alice Porter has been finding out. Apologies for going to that package earlier.
Serena is a 24-year-old charity worker hoping to buy her first property. She's urgently trying to secure a mortgage before interest rates increase even further.
My mortgage broker actually proactively called me this morning saying that she'd been advising all of her clients to get on the ladder now and just get in there, get a mortgage agreement, because interest rates are only going to go up and property prices are only going to go up. And the last thing I want to do is make a rod for my own back and wait too long, and everything's much more expensive than it is now.
So we've recently heard that some mortgage deals are being withdrawn by mortgage providers, by building societies. Is that making you feel quite panicked about your decision?
I'd rather have the time to explore my options a bit more, because right now I am restricted in that I can pretty much only get a 1-bed, and I was looking at, if I wait a couple of months I could maybe save up a little bit more and get a 2-bed, but now that option's just been completely taken away.
But not everyone can easily exchange on properties at the moment. For the hundreds and thousands of people who own properties with unsafe cladding, like Paul Afshar, they're unable to sell their homes amid spiralling costs.
In 2007, when I bought my flat, the interest on my mortgage rate was 3.5%. As of September, it's now well over 5%, and that's only going to keep going up. A big part of the problem was that I got a bad deal on my mortgage originally because I was a first-time buyer and I was buying through the government shared ownership scheme. And that bad deal, unfortunately, is coming back to haunt me with the very real and very scary prospect of spiralling costs thanks to continued interest rate rises.
Some economists have predicted that the Bank of England will raise interest rates to 5.8% by spring, which will make it less attractive to buy a new property. At the same time,
today we have cut stamp duty.
The Chancellor's announcement that stamp duty is being cut shows that the government is trying to fuel the housing market. The question is, will it benefit people if they can't afford the mortgage repayments in the first place? But estate agents are calling for calm after a turbulent few days and say even with the increases, interest rates are still low.
The biggest problems people had during Brexit times, financial crisis times and so on was they couldn't afford to buy properties. It was a case of lenders weren't lending. So now it's a case of lenders are still lending, interest rates are still low. There is obviously concern with the market or where the market's heading, but ultimately, if something's at the right price, buyers should be buying.
For many buyers, their conundrum now is whether to fix their interest rates or wait to see if the forecasts are wrong. Alice Porter, GB News.
We're joined now by property expert Russell Quirk. Russell, good to see you.
Afternoon.
Is it possible to get a mortgage at a decent rate now?
It's certainly possible to get a mortgage on a variable rate, which inarguably is higher than it was a few days ago and a few weeks ago. And there's been a lot of hype, of course, in the media over the last 24 hours with regard to lenders pulling mortgage rates. And I think the picture that's being painted is that lenders are scared. Lenders don't want to lend, as if this is some kind of 2008, 2009 financial crisis all over again. And I fundamentally disagree with that. Because we've seen so much turbulence, so much kind of this kind of real roller coaster of rates and this battle, I'd say, between the Bank of England and the Treasury, which I would imagine that given that the Treasury effectively employs Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England, the Treasury will win. Because we've seen this kind of this unprecedented turmoil over the last day or two, it's not a surprise that lenders are going to have to stop, regroup and decide simply what those rates will be. The problem is that these rate fluctuations are taking everybody by surprise, and it means that a lender cannot therefore set a decent fixed rate because that rate or the underlying rate will change very, very quickly. So this really isn't the panic that I think some in the mainstream media are gleefully setting out. This is simply a reset. And I think, as you said earlier, Gloria, really, this is a time where we are seeing a very different type of government, a very Thatcherite government. Liz Truss is definitely channeling her hero, Margaret Thatcher, here. And I think that we've just got to take a breath and take stock, because my personal opinion is that she needs to hold her nerve. And that's why I think she's not likely to U-turn. She's not likely to go onto the television and do lots of interviews as some kind of running commentary on what is effectively casino bankers simply taking profits as a consequence of their short-selling antics over the last 48 hours or so.
If we head back to the mortgage and the housing situation, though, I mean, we've got 935 fewer mortgage products on the market today compared to yesterday. It's not going to help those who are trying to get onto the housing ladder. And the other question, Russell, should they actually do it at the moment, bearing in mind some of these forecasts that actually property prices could fall 10% next year?
Yeah, so way back, as long as I can remember in this industry, there have been the doomsayers that will take any opportunity to try and forecast and predict house price drops. They've only ever been, in the last 30 or 40 years, correct twice. And that was at the beginning of the 1990s and then again in 2008, 2009. We've just experienced through 2016, 17, 18 and 19 the spectre of Brexit and a no-deal Brexit. Lots and lots of commentators, those on the negative side, like Capital Economics and some others, have long forecast that house prices are going to drop by whatever number they pick out of the earmark, frankly, which is 15, 20, 25%. And then, of course, we had the same at the beginning of the pandemic. The same doomsayers, the same negative commentators saying exactly the same thing. Frankly, it's a lazy prediction, and it's based really on just grabbing a headline or so for those particular organisations, in my opinion. I think if we've managed to brave Brexit, the biggest political event that we've seen in recent living memory, and indeed a global unprecedented pandemic, I think a slight wobble in the financial markets is something that the housing market will simply, in the next few weeks and months, shrug off.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your views there. And, of course, we'll keep an eye on those markets, see what happens. Thanks very much.
Well, voting in 4 Russian-held parts of Ukraine ended yesterday as indications have grown that Moscow intends to annex more territory.
Well, those votes in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia have been denounced as a sham by both the Ukrainian government and many Western allies. Up to 4 million people, remember, asked to vote in those regions, making up 15% of Ukraine's territory.
Joining us now is Stefan Weichert, who's a journalist that's been in Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Stefan, condemnation from the international community saying the referendums are a sham. Is condemnation, is that the end of the matter?
I don't know. I think that it's hard to say exactly what will happen now. I mean, it seems like we are probably going to expect over the next I guess, few days that the Russian President Vladimir Putin might come out and say that these regions are now officially part of Russia. What exactly the West will do as a response, I think, is difficult to say. Now they're saying that they will not acknowledge these elections as legitimate. They call them scam elections. And exactly what will come after that is hard to say. I mean, there could be more weapon support coming to Ukraine. There could be tougher sanctions. All that we'll wait and see what's going to happen.
And clearly, many in the West believe that this is a cover for Russia perhaps to take further military action against these particular areas. But what of the situation with the Ukrainians? Do they have the firepower yet to be able to eject the Russian separatists, as they're called, from these particular areas?
Yes, it seems like they still have firepower at the moment. Like, I just come from eastern Ukraine a couple of days ago, and there what the soldiers are telling me is that we still have a lot to give, a lot to push with. And if we're looking at it right now, for example, Ukraine is already breaking through another part of the Russian front line around the eastern Ukrainian city of Liman. So, I mean, things are still developing. How far they can continue to do that is, of course, a big question. But for now, it doesn't seem like that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is over at all.
It's still a question that there are those Russian speakers in that area who still identify more with Russia than they do with Ukraine.
That's true. I mean, I've been traveling to eastern Ukraine multiple times over the last 3 years. I mean, it's true that there are people who are pro-Ukrainian, there are people who are pro-Russian, and then there's a huge majority, I would say, who just want the war to end. And that's still the case. I mean, a lot of people are living in poverty. A lot of people have destroyed houses. They're not going to have any gas for the winter because it's not possible to deliver it at the moment. They have problem with paying like mortgages, like paying like even just for like rent and all kind of stuff. They have problems getting food on the table. So a lot of people just want peace. But I would say that the number of pro-Russians in the territory at the moment still held by the Ukrainian army is decreasing a bit from what I experienced before the invasion, because people are saying that the destruction they have seen, they have witnessed, caused by the Russian army, the Russian invasion, have made people say that this is not the Russia that we thought that we knew. This is not the Russia that we actually used to like.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Stay with us. Plenty more to come, including more on the economic turmoil that's playing out in the UK. We're going to have John Redwood, actually, to get a different perspective on this. He will tell us that there is no economic turmoil that we should be worried about in the long term.
And if you're worrying, how about this? There could be a twindemic, the spread of flu and COVID. That could mean an even tougher winter ahead. All that to cheer you up. Before that, let's get the weather.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good afternoon, 2 minutes past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Now, the Bank of England's announced emergency measures in a bid to stabilise currency and debt markets. The bid says if dysfunction in the market continues or worsens, then there'll be material risk to UK financial stability. The Treasury says the government will continue to work closely with the bank following what they called significant volatility in recent days. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is calling on the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, to make an emergency statement. Well, earlier today, Mr Kwarteng met with investment banks to try to reassure them of his economic plan. Well, the meeting came as the International Monetary Fund criticised Mr Kwarteng's tax-cutting mini-budget. In a rare statement issued last night, the IMF, which monitors economies around the world, warned the Chancellor's economic plans would likely increase inequality in the UK. Food inflation has hit its highest rate on record, with shoppers now paying 10.6% more than they were a year ago. Analysis by Kantar shows the average annual spend on grocery shopping will rise by over £530 if consumers buy the same products as last year. Prices have been driven up by the war in Ukraine, which continues to push up the cost of animal feed, fertiliser and vegetable oil. The Labour conference has come to a close after the party spent much of the last 2 days setting out their plans for the UK economy. The final speeches including plans for GPs in England to give face-to-face appointments to every patient and also a pledge for every primary school child to have access to a breakfast club. The deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner's closing speech this afternoon accused the Conservatives of not caring about a working class.
An unequal economy is an inefficient one. It's perhaps the starkest difference between us and the Tories. Never again can we let them pretend that they are the patriotic party. I love my country. That's why I want so much better for it. But the Tories now think our biggest economic problem is you, the working people of Britain.
Northern Ireland ministers have held talks for the first time since the cabinet reshuffle in an attempt to establish a power-sharing agreement instalment. The Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris and the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney have met at Hillsborough Castle to try and rebuild the partnership that has splintered the Irish government. The aim is to find an agreement by the end of next month, which will allow an executive to be formed and a devolved government to function again in Northern Ireland. The Irish Foreign Minister says they'll put compromises in the place where parties can live with.
The focus of our discussions really has been to rebuild a partnership a partnership approach that really has been the foundation of the peace agreement that happened nearly 25 years ago, where when there are difficulties and problems, the two governments, through the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Irish Foreign Minister, work together to try to put compromises in place that parties can live with. I believe it is absolutely doable for us to get that work done.
The president of the EU Commission and NATO say the leaks in the major gas pipeline between Russia and Europe was sabotage. Ursula von der Leyen also said any deliberate disruption of active European energy infrastructure is unacceptable and it will lead to the strongest possible response. Seismologists in Denmark and Sweden say they had registered 2 powerful blasts on Monday in the area of the leaks. The Danish defence minister says it can take up to 2 weeks before they can investigate the area. A hurricane in the US has been made a Category 4 storm. That means catastrophic. It's heading towards Florida. Hurricane Ian now has sustained maximum winds of 140 miles per hour. 2.5 million people in the state are under evacuation orders as the storm sweeps across the coast. It's expected to cause devastating damage and is on track to hit land somewhere along Florida's Gulf Coast today. The US President Joe Biden says the military have been deployed.
My administration is on alert and in action to help the people of Florida. I've approved Florida's request for emergency assistance immediately upon receiving it from the governor when they received it. And I directed my team to surge federal assistance there before the storm hit. FEMA has already deployed 700 personnel to Florida, and the governor has activated 5,000 state National Guard with another 2,000 guards coming from other states.
You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Newsday.
Hello, the time is 7 minutes past 1. This is GB Newsday with me, Gloria De Piero.
And me, Mark Longhurst. Nearly forgot who I was because I'm just looking at the pound, which has slumped yet again after, of course, we heard about this Bank of England intervention to calm the international money markets, the bond markets. Let's just tell you that the pound has fallen again to 1.05, down about 1.6% in reaction to that move by the bank, all coming after a growing chorus of criticism over the government's economic policies. The White House adding its voice to those who've criticised the UK's approach and urging Number 10 to maintain fiscal discipline.
The International Monetary Fund has also urged the Chancellor to rethink those tax cuts for the wealthiest in a rare intervention on the economic policy of a major nation.
Well, we'll have some expert analysis as the bank starts to splash the cash in the bond markets, that continuing, we're told, until October, as well as getting the views in a moment of Sir John Redwood, former Conservative MP, and what's going to be at the heart of this new government's economic policy.
And he is a current Conservative MP.
Yes, sorry for that. And with some financial expertise as well, one might add.
As the cost of living crisis continues to hit local businesses and facilities as well as households. Pound is also falling following the Chancellor's fiscal announcements last Friday, leaving many in a uncertain position.
Let's speak to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, who's with a UK business owner there, Anna. It seems that the bad news just doesn't stop coming for all these people trying to keep their businesses going.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm here in Ferrybridge in West Yorkshire at a haberdashery called Idea to Adorn. I'm joined by Cassie Thompson. She's the business owner here. Cassie, we've heard about the plummeting pound. You do lots of imports. Well, you do as much British as you can, but you do have to import certain items, don't you, and fabrics. How has this impacted you?
Quite heavily. As you've said, there were lots of quality brands that aren't manufactured in the UK, so therefore have to be imported, and with that the price of paying a duty has made the fabric or the items that I purchase rise. So whereas I'm giving customers a really good deal on fabrics and haberdashery and things, that's now starting to look not so much.
How much extra are you paying now then, and what other implications of the cost of living have you got as well?
So, for instance, I've just made a purchase of some timeless treasure fabric that actually comes from the US that's then imported to Holland. And then from there it's shipped to me, approximately about £600, £700 worth of stock I'm having to pay £150 duty on, which I'm having to pass on to the consumer, unfortunately. But yeah, it's not helpful.
And what do you think the answer is? Because you've backed Brexit, haven't you? And you think British manufacturing's the way forward?
Yeah, I think the UK has the ability to stand on its own. We did it in the past. We can continue to do it. I've said before that we've kind of hit the peak when it comes to the economy, and we're slowly going back to the World War days where it was make, do and mend, and people are starting to realise that we've no option but to go back to being in-house. And I guess that in the next decade, if not the next two, we'll see that the UK will go back to manufacturing for itself, because it'll work out a hell of a lot cheaper and a hell of a lot better for us as a country, and especially to keep the money inside, so it's spent inside, so we all get better out of it.
And, you know, the government have released this mini budget. That's part of that is helping businesses and helping businesses with their energy, cutting tax, national insurance. Do you think that's enough help for you at the moment?
It all looks great on paper, and it's fantastic when the government want to help small businesses, but these are big people that are up high that don't really get to see what the people on the ground are actually doing. And even though these incentives are being put in place, trying to find them and access them so that you can move forward with your business, sometimes it's really hard. So it'd be nice to actually be approached and said, right, okay, this is available for you as a small or independent business owner, because as we already know, the pubs are slowly disappearing. It's not going to be too long if we carry on like this that the rest of the small businesses follow behind.
Thank you so much for your insight there, Cassie, and for talking to us. So Cassie's message here in Ferry Bridge is that going British is the way forward, British manufacturing, and that's the way to help us out of this slump at the moment.
I'm sure lots of people would agree with that. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us the voices from the front line. Thank you, Anna Riley.
Yeah, no words of encouragement, I'm afraid, at the moment. Just to update you, as we were saying about the value of the pound, which has fallen after that Bank of England intervention in the bond markets, buying government debt effectively. Pound falling further against the US dollar, down 1.5% to 105.70. At the moment. So clearly a lot of people keeping an eye on that. And more political reaction coming through. Nicola Sturgeon now, Scotland's First Minister, calling on MPs to end their recess early and for Parliament to return, saying that the UK is in the grip of a rapidly deteriorating economic crisis.
And that's an opposition leader, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. She has called for a statement from the Chancellor. But actually,
what's it due to be back?
The 11th of October, Tuesday, the 11th of October. It had been a week later, but they brought that forward because Parliament had not sat for so long during the morning for the Queen. But the
Tory party conference next week.
But what's interesting, so you cited Nicola Sturgeon's critique. I also added Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. But this is what's interesting. In the last 10 minutes or so, Tory MP Robert Largan, he is a Member of Parliament, Conservative Member of Parliament for High Peak. He got elected at the last general election. He has said he thinks it is a mistake to cut the top income tax rate of 45% when the government's fiscal room for manoeuvre is so limited. Also, the Conservative MP Mel Stride, he is the chair of the Commons Treasury Committee, a very influential cross-party committee in the Commons, warns there is a lot of risk there at the moment that cannot be denied.
Now, we ought to point out Mel Stride, of course, was Rishi Sunak's supporter. He ran Rishi Sunak's campaign, effectively. So there is that rump of Sunak MPs who clearly feel that they were not listened to when they were talking about the whole issue of inflation and the way the economy should be handled. But this other MP, I assume he's one of the red wall MPs.
Well, it's actually High Peak is one that goes backwards and forwards between Labour and the Conservatives. It's more traditionally marginal, but he got elected. He took that from Labour, who took it from the Tories the time before. If you see what I mean, it's one that sticks.
He may well be worried about what's going to happen to his own seat, and how many other MPs will be feeling the same now.
Well, you have to knock on doors and sell this stuff. Now, actually, I'm not sure people were talking about from my experience knocking on doors, talking about the money markets when they knock on doors.
Yield.
Indeed. I think that may be a little bit niche for what's knocking doors. But what they will have heard is that bankers' bonuses will go up. That top rate of tax, now 45% tax rate, you'd be sort of pretty surprised at how few people earn enough money to be on that 45% tax rate. So they'll be wondering why they are getting a tax cut. And of course, food prices are going up.
Well, and the other thing is this general sense of well, crisis may be too strong a word, but certainly when we have bankers, as we've seen them now, being called to the Treasury to meet the Chancellor this morning, most of them, we have to say, from American banks, after the White House expressed its concern, the IMF expressed its concern, and clearly the Bank of England then, with what it said was an emergency intervention on the bond markets, clearly people are going to be worried about the direction that the UK is taking.
Yes, and business leaders too, chucking their two penneth in. The Ryanair chief, Michael O'Leary, has described the economic plan put forward by the UK government as, wait for it, nuts. Speaking in Dublin, Mr O'Leary said the policy could potentially bankrupt the economy in the coming years. Now, we do want to bring you some balance and perspective on this, and we are hoping to speak to Sir John Redwood, the Conservative MP, who is absolutely full square behind the government's plans. Of course, it's only been a few days since they announced their fiscal plans, and change and growth do not happen in a matter of days. That's something that Chris Eaton-Harris, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, was saying as he was on a visit.
A few more noises off. An unnamed Tory backbench source speaking to the Press Association, saying it was depressing to see Rishi Sunak's predictions come true in alarming fashion, basically saying you can't govern on the back of a couple of think tank pamphlets. I think that is probably a pretty pointed criticism of Kwasi Kwarteng's position and what he's put into play.
Yeah, and we don't know how Rishi Sunak will be feeling. Perhaps he will be feeling vindicated. We know he doesn't drink, but he does like Coca-Cola, so
Mr. Sunak,
maybe he's hitting the Coca-Cola.
We'd be very pleased to speak to you here on GB Newsday and find out what your thoughts are. But let's just reflect that we'll keep you updated with all this breaking news. And, of course, after the break, we'll have more on the mortgage lenders and what they're doing, pulling the deals in overnight, and how much will it cost you if you can find a mortgage.
Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. A chilly feel again out there today. A mixture of sun and showers, but some places seeing a lot of showers. Quite a few of us actually just staying dry and fine. Low pressure is controlling our weather, but it's sitting out to the east and the winds are still mostly coming down from the north. Perhaps not quite as strong as recent days, but still bringing a chilly feel. And this weather front in particular bringing plenty of showers to parts of eastern Scotland this morning, but increasingly they'll push down across parts of northeast England this afternoon and through this evening. A few showers certainly for Wales and southwest England. One or two for Northern Ireland, much of western Scotland, the Midlands, southeast England, they're staying dry and bright. But it isn't warm, temperatures struggling to get up to 16, 17, and certainly feeling colder as it turns wetter across northeast England. A pretty grim end to the day in Newcastle and Middlesbrough, and that rain expanding across northern England this evening, and then spreading southwards through the early hours across the Midlands into parts of Wales and eventually into southern England too. Away from that little curl of rain, many places will be dry overnight. Some showers keeping going in western Scotland. Temperatures down into single figures. So another cool start to the day on Thursday. We start also with a lot of cloud and some rain initially across parts of southern England. That should fade fairly quickly in the morning. And then apart from a few showers coming into northeast England and southern parts of Scotland, much of the country will be dry. And again, we'll see some sunny spells. But again, temperatures will be mostly a little below average for the time of year. But the winds will be lighter, so again, it won't feel perhaps quite as chilly as it has done through the early part of the week. Still a few showers drifting into the Midlands on Thursday evening, but otherwise most places dry until this area of rain arrives in the northwest. That is from a fairly active weather system that's coming steaming in from the Atlantic. The weather front's bringing a spell of heavy rain during Friday and the isobars squeezing together, so it's going to get windy as well.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Well, let's just update you on a rapidly changing situation as regards the economy and the financial markets. As we were telling you, the Bank of England intervened in the bond markets, effectively what government debt is sold at on the international money markets, to actually calm those markets in what they said was an emergency move. It appears to have calmed things on the bond markets, but not the currency markets. The pound down yet again to 105 against the dollar, down about 1.6%. And clearly that is going to be a worry for both the bank and the government as it continues to wrestle with these problems. And let's not forget that we've had the IMF and even the White House criticising the economic policies pursued by this government.
Let's now talk to the Conservative MP for Wokingham, John Redwood. John, thank you for joining us today. I think everybody would agree that the government have every right to pursue an economic plan which they believe will result in growth. But don't we need to hear from the Prime Minister or the Chancellor at a time when people are anxious? Don't we need that reassurance and that reassurance to come from them?
Well, I think they did offer those reassurances in a very important way last Friday. I think you're right that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor need to have good conversation with the British public. I don't think there's any point in them trying to engage with short-selling speculators or with people who attack the pound, which has been happening in recent days, just as those same people have been attacking the yen and the euro in previous weeks. What they said on Friday to all of us was reassuring, because it said that they understood the pain people were going through and the difficulties business faced from very high energy policies. So they were going to spend what could be quite a bit of money on capping the energy prices before they get to even crazier levels. And they offered various ways of ensuring that people have a bit more money back in their bank accounts and their purses and wallets to face some of these big bills through the one-off payments that have been announced a while ago to pensioners, people on benefits.
I think we've got, yes, a problem with the signal there from Sir John Redwood. We'll try and re-establish that. And just to address the point that Sir John was making, of course, there is speculation going on the markets, particularly with the currency. Of course, it's called short selling, where they try and sell the pound short. But in terms of the political fallout, let's just remind you what Gloria was pointing out, that Mel Stride, who is the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, a Conservative MP, but also he was Rishi Sunak's campaign manager, has said there is a lot of concern within the parliamentary party, the Conservative Party. There is no doubt about that. I don't want to speculate on the future of the Chancellor other than to say I think where the party should be at the moment is really uniting at a time of economic crisis. The last thing we want now is a political crisis to compound that, and I really think the focus on this issue of growth.
And a Conservative... John Redwood is back. Were you just... I just asked a question. Oh, you were reassuring. You said that we'd heard from the Chancellor on Friday, but my point was, you know, things have sort of been... There's been quite a lot going on since Friday, and don't we need to hear from Liz Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng today as soon as possible, just to reassure us all in the face of this sort of volatility that the markets seem to be expressing?
I don't think there's any point in the government trying to run a commentary on people who want to short British bonds or short the pound. It's not in the power of the government to control the value of the pound, and they shouldn't try to. The last time we tried to do that as a matter of policy, it gave us a very nasty boom and bust, and everybody agreed after that episode with the European exchange rate mechanism, we shouldn't be targeting the pound. The Bank of England may wish to make statements. Indeed, I hear it has just made a statement. I thought it was quite wrong of the bank to be deciding to sell bonds when they were already very low in price and have been sold off by bond traders. And I'm very pleased that they said they're not going to be doing that for the next week or two. And we'll have to see what else they want to do. But if anybody has to help with interest rates, it is the Bank of England. And it's not just the short-term interest rates, which they have the unique power to fix, but they also have a substantial influence over the longer-term rates, which affect your and my mortgage or families' mortgages. And that's what they are saying they're going to do today, and I think that is welcome.
Well, when we actually examine what the bank has said in more detail, they have themselves acknowledged this is an emergency measure, unlimited buying, even though it only takes place, I think, till October the 14th when it stops. Clearly, they are in a position where they think this is a dire state of affairs, given the fact that this is pushing interest rate and therefore government debt higher and higher.
Well, they're right that the interest rates had become very high for the circumstances. I've always thought the Bank of England had done quite enough with its recent rate rises, and it's cancelling all of the extra money it had been printing and all of the bond buying it had been doing. I thought that if they tried to sell bonds into what was already a weak global bond market, it might cause difficulties. And I'm very pleased that at least for a short time, they're not going to be selling bonds. It doesn't seem to me to make a lot of sense for them to sell a lot of bonds into a very weak market and lose us all a lot of money on it, because these are, of course, bonds that they may well have bought last year at much higher prices.
John, you are a veteran. You have been around a long time in Parliament. You have seen Conservative governments and Labour governments too go through their ups and their downs. But the new Tory MP for High Peak, he got elected in 2019. He said it is a mistake to cut the top income tax rate of 45% when the government's fiscal room for manoeuvre is so limited. So he has been tweeting, saying he has serious reservations about a number of announcements made by the Chancellor. So it's not just the money markets that are anxious. It's your own side. What do you say to MPs who have felt the need to express that publicly via a social media site?
Well, I'm never critical of a colleague who sometimes criticises a government policy, because I have been known to do that myself. So it would be quite wrong of me to tell them. I don't happen to agree with my colleague on this subject. I think the government is wanting to pursue three parts of a crucial strategy to see off what could be otherwise a nasty recession. And the first part was some tax cuts so that we have competitive tax rates and so that we give some money back to people on below average and average earnings, as well as people earning more. The second part of the strategy is a series of measures to try and get us producing more of our own energy at home, growing more of our own food, producing more of the products we need to make and to buy, because we need to save on the imports. And that would help with pressures on sterling. I look forward to that work being rolled out in 2 or 3 weeks' time. We're awaiting that, and I'm sure they'll be announcing things to Parliament shortly. And then at the time when they make their statement along with the Office of Budget Responsibility, we need to see what all their spending plans are. Because whilst we want to have enough money for teachers, nurses, doctors, decent health service, we also need to see what their plans are for improving quality and productivity in the public services, and for weeding out those bits of public expenditure which we don't have to have, so that the whole thing adds up.
We've talked about the cost in terms of currency markets, bond markets and so on. What about the political cost, though? Just picking up what Gloria was saying, because Mel Stride, Conservative chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, who, as we've said, was a Rishi Sunak campaign manager, has, however, indicated that there is a lot of concern within the parliamentary party and that where the party should be at the moment. How much of a rift is there between that Sunak rump, those who didn't support Liz Truss, and what they're seeing happening in terms of market reaction?
Well, I don't know, because Parliament is not in session at the moment, because we've been given another recess for the Labour Party conference and then the Conservative Party conference. You would be a better judge of that than I, because if they are very concerned, they normally communicate their views to the media. As I understand it, having seen colleagues on the Friday when this was all announced, there was a very broad base of support for it. And there was general agreement that the squeeze was too tight, that the very high energy prices were too menacing to businesses as well as to families, households. And therefore there was welcome for giving some money back to people to afford those bills and to capping the bills, although that would obviously entail some cost to the public purse. What we hope will happen is that we hope that gas and electricity prices over the next few years will return to something like a more normal level. And then the taxpayer will be spared a big bill.
You mentioned that Parliament is not sitting, and the Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has now called for Parliament to be recalled. That is happening in the last few minutes. Your reaction to that, please?
Well, I don't think that's a very fair call, because we sensibly granted them a week off Parliament to have their conference. So clearly
nobody's got a conference
the governing
next
party
Thursday.
would like to have its conference as well.
Well,
and I don't think there's anything the government should say about the state of the pound for the reasons I've just
John, nobody's having a conference this Thursday or this Friday or next Thursday or the following Friday or the following Monday for that reason. That you don't have to wait till the 11th of October if you don't want to.
Well, no, but it's building this idea that every time the value of the pound goes down, that is a crisis where ministers have to make some statement. I don't think they should make a statement every time the pound goes down. For every day it goes down, there'll probably be a day when it goes up. And what normally happens is these short sellers of a currency get away with it and make some money for a bit, and then they overdo it, and then they lose quite a lot of money because the pound suddenly bounces. Indeed, we saw a sharp bounce at the beginning of this week after the sell-off in Asia.
But just to go back to the politics, as you're saying, Parliament not sitting, but you haven't heard the jungle drums beating, because there are some suggestions that letters have already gone into Sir Graham Brady. Obviously, we're not talking about another leadership election, but clearly an indication about the worry on the backbenchers.
Well, I find that difficult to believe that a large number of people want to change leader 2 weeks after we've just got a new Prime Minister installed. I mean, that would be so ludicrous. And the idea of democratic elections is you don't always get everything you want, but you get behind the democratic answer. And we've had a democratic answer. The Prime Minister won by a very healthy margin amongst the Conservative Party membership, who are the electorate for the final round. And I would hope my colleagues would give her a reasonable run to show what she can do.
Sir John Redwood, thank you very much indeed for your time. Apologies for the break-up on the signal, but we managed to cover all the bases. Thank you very much indeed once more for joining us on GB Newsday. I'm just going to update you a bit of breaking news we're getting from the Treasury. They've issued the readout, as they call it, this meeting that the Chancellor had with all the bankers this morning at the Treasury. We're being told the Chancellor underlined the government's clear commitment of fiscal discipline, going on to say that Kwasi Kwarteng underlined the government's clear commitment, reiterating he's working closely with the Governor of the Bank of England and the OBR ahead of delivering his medium-term fiscal plan on 23rd of November, i.e. further tax plans. Also adding that the Chancellor discussed how he'll expand the supply side of the economy through tax incentives and reforms, hoping to deliver greater opportunities and bear down on inflation, close quotes.
Coming up after the news, we'll be chatting with our political reporter, Catherine Foster. First, it's your news update with Rosie.
Thanks both. It's 1:35. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Bank of England's announced emergency measures in a bid to stabilise currency and debt markets. The bank says if dysfunction continues or worsens, then there'll be a material risk to the UK's financial stability. The Treasury says the government will continue to work closely with the bank following what they called significant volatility in recent days. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is calling on the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, to make an emergency statement. Well, earlier today, Mr Kwarteng met with investment banks to try to reassure them of his economic plan. The meeting comes as the International Monetary Fund criticised Mr Kwarteng's tax-cutting mini-budget. In a rare statement issued last night, the IMF, which monitors economies around the world, warned the Chancellor's economic plans would likely increase inequality in the UK. The Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, has accused the Conservatives of not caring about the working classes in her closing speech at the party conference. The event finished after Labour spent much of the last 2 days setting out its plans for the UK economy. Well, in the final speeches, there were plans for GPs in England to give face-to-face appointments to every patient and a pledge for every primary school child to have access to a breakfast club. Northern Ireland ministers have held talks for the first time since the cabinet reshuffle in an attempt to establish a power-sharing agreement instalment. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, and the Irish Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney, met at Hillsborough Castle this morning to try to rebuild the partnership that splintered the Irish government. The aim is to find an agreement by the end of next month, which will allow an executive to be formed and a devolved government to function again in Northern Ireland. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Well, let's take a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.061 and 1.109 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,537 and 94 pence per ounce.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
on radio,
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Before the break, we were speaking to the Conservative MP, John Redwood. He said, hold your nerve, the growth plan will work. Some Conservative MPs are expressing their concerns publicly. To go through it all with us is our political reporter, GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. Hello.
Oh, goodness. So much news. So in the last hour or so, it's emerged, we were speculating a little bit earlier, weren't we, about what conference was going to be like and all these
This is the Tory party conference in Birmingham.
Which is starting, because Labour's finished today. So next thing we will go on to, it starts on Sunday. So it's emerged that Rishi Sunak, the man not saying, I told you so, but obviously many people are
Mel
thinking...
Stride, his supporter,
He did tell them so. Will not be attending. An ally has said that Sunak will give Liz Truss all the space she needs to own the moment. Make of that what you will. Is that
That's a brilliant quote.
I'm backing off to be supportive.
Or you could,
I'm giving you the rope to sort of...
Yes, hang yourself on,
Interesting. And also, apparently, some other big beasts who, because... The Conservatives, I think, have just gone so quiet. What's noticeable? Some of them are coming out and talking, but by and large, there is silence while all this is going. So David Davis will not be attending conference. Sajid Javid will not be attending conference. Mel Stride will not be attending conference.
Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, which has direct responsibility for discussing these issues.
Are they boycotting or are they...
I'm going to provide some balance here. Because, these are people, not Mel Stride particularly, but these are people who have served in government, who have been to umpteen Tory party conferences. The first time when I was a Labour MP that I didn't have to go to a Labour Party conference, my goodness, I grabbed that opportunity and didn't go. So let's be kind to them and think, they want to spend time with their families. Sajid Javid's been with the cabinet for a long time. Rishi Sunak's just come from that gruelling leadership race. I merely suggest it may be plausible.
Sure, but the Conservative Party are not doing well in the polls. Labour has a spring in their step, and if they're wanting to project a united party, Liz Truss did say she would form a government of all the talents, and then she didn't really. Very few Rishi Sunak supporters made their way in. If they really want to get behind her, as you know, many people are saying, well, we'll give her the chance. Surely she would want them to be there, clapping from the sidelines. And some of them obviously feel that they don't want to do that, they can't do that, and obviously that they will draw focus because journalists are going to be going up to them and saying, Rishi Sunak,
that's also a good point.
Looking for that. So it's better for them not to go.
As Gloria was saying, Sir Keir Starmer now calling for Parliament to get back to work, recalling it. Obviously, it's not in session or sitting because of the party conferences. Is there an indication, again, that when we get back to normal business, that both Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng will face some really difficult moments from the backbenchers? Not just Mel Stride, but others, Red Wall MPs who think, this is getting serious, this is getting out of hand.
I'm sure they will, and also there'll be lots of MPs that came in under Boris Johnson and his levelling up, his boosterism, that will now be thinking
this is not the message that's going out.
Bode well for me. So I certainly think there are considerable difficulties ahead. And I mean, only last night when Kwasi Kwarteng was speaking on the phone call that he had to try to calm MPs, to reassure them, say, don't worry, I have a plan, I'm going to lay out how this will be paid for. And then one MP took notes and then very immediately leaked them to the Daily Telegraph. He was saying then, the markets are settling. Well, Are they? I mean, this is what, you know, the pound has gone down to 105, it might be 106 now. But, you know, this intervention from the Bank of England saying, OK, well, we were going into a phase of quantitative tightening, fiscal tightening. Now we're going into quantitative loosening again to try to undo some of this
inflation stuff, yeah.
It is extraordinary.
And the one thing that all MPs of all parties care about is keeping their jobs if they're standing again. And it is plausible that those MPs have been knocking on doors, Parliament's not sitting, since that mini-budget, and they do not like what they're hearing. We have had John Redwood, who has been very steadfast in his support, Chrissy Heaton-Harris, who is who is the Northern Ireland Secretary, saying, come on, give it a chance. Do you think there's any sense that the leadership of the Conservative Party can get people, those Tory MPs, to hold their nerves? They're not going to change course, are they? That would be even more dangerous.
Well, not according to what the Chancellor's been saying to those bankers at a meeting this morning.
Exactly.
No, but I think in some ways it was... I mean, Liz Truss said that she would cut taxes, they would go for growth, and she's doing what she said she would. But even more so, I think, than was expected. So, for example, it isn't easy to sell, is it, to ordinary people on ordinary incomes, worried about bills, worried about the price of food, this top rate of tax cut that they're bringing in, let alone the banker's bonus. And I think that's only at a cost of about £2 billion,
right.
which is huge, but not a lot in terms of the grand scheme of things. But the government has chosen to very clearly give big tax breaks to the people at the very top. And there's some suggestions, you know, they're being asked now about, well, what about raising the thresholds at which you start to pay tax because of...
It's about 12,500 at the moment.
12,500 and then about 50,000 for higher rate tax. That's actually because those tax thresholds have been frozen. It's effectively a tax rise on lots of people. They could do something about that. Kwasi Kwarteng was saying, well, I do have constraints in what I'm able to do, but you know, they have made a choice not to raise those tax thresholds, but to get rid of the one at the top. So I think it is very difficult messaging to sell
on the doorstep.
To ordinary
We'd
people.
love to hear from you, actually. Catherine, thank you. We always love hearing from you. But we'd love to hear from you at home. Is this a bit of a media markets hoo-ha? Should the government, stand firm to pursue their course? Do you think, actually, that it will result in a growing economy? Are you annoyed that bankers will get bigger bonuses? Are you annoyed that 45p tax cut? Tell us. We will read out some of your views in this programme. It's GBViews at GBNews.uk.
Yeah, if you're just annoyed, get in touch with us. Let's reflect on the mortgage market. Of course, direct consequences of what's been happening with interest rates. Well, the mortgage providers withdrew products at the fastest rate on record last night. 935 fewer products on the market this morning compared to yesterday, all amid fears of yet more interest rate rises to come. And the pound, as we've just been discussing, heading down to 105, 106. The Bank of England announcing it will intervene to calm the gilt edge markets, i.e. what government debt's being sold for.
What does this mean for aspiring and current home owners across the UK? The Chancellor announced stamp duty cuts in his mini-budget on Friday. That should be helpful. But is that going to be enough, given that so many mortgage deals have been withdrawn from the market, and we must assume that when they come back onto the market, they will be worse offers? So let's talk to Sally Mitchell, who is a mortgage advisor and broker. She works for mortgage mums. Hello. Sally, can you still get a decent mortgage if your fixed rate is about to come to an end, or if you are trying to get onto the housing ladder?
Well, the options are definitely less than they were. It feels that if you're fishing in the pond, it's a smaller pond and the fish are more expensive.
And should people actually be doing it at the moment? Because the other thing that we're hearing is that some are estimating that the housing market itself could fall by 10%. I.e., if you buy now, you could even be in negative equity by next year.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to consider if you're thinking about getting on the market or remortgaging. It's not the most ideal time. I'd say if you're on a fix for the next 8 months, 1 year, whatever, something like that, then stay put. Enjoy your low rate and don't worry too much. These things are cyclical. They won't stay the same forever. Things will get better.
Well, that's an optimistic note. What if you are renting at the moment? The rental market's high as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, a lot of people are forced into renting because the demand is so high and the supply is so low for owning your own property. And in places like London, rentals have just gone through the roof, extremely popular.
And you are a broker, so you're seeing what's out there in the market. I mean, are there products outside the big main lenders that people can think about and go, as you say, just for a temporary fix for an interest rate-only mortgage, for instance?
Yes, that's totally possible. If it's your own home, I would always try and steer away from interest only, because you have to have an exit strategy, and quite often for people that is selling the property, and you don't really want to be in that position if it's your own home. There are options out there. There are products out there. Please don't think that there is nothing to choose from. There are choices. It's just not as wide. And you're absolutely right. Every choice is more expensive than it was a few weeks ago.
Some might argue that the predicted or forecasts may not happen, but that fall in house prices, that's a necessary correction, which is of no comfort if you own a house, but if you're trying to get onto the ladder, then it's probably welcome.
Yes. Yeah, it's horses for courses, isn't it? I think when you're buying your own property, really you've got to look long term. It's not purely investment. I know we expect to make money on our properties, but it's really important that you move and you choose your property based on what's right for your lifestyle and your household.
OK, well, let's actually bite the bullet. Young couple coming to you, perhaps they've just got married, they're looking to get their first home, maybe a flat, whatever. What do they do?
First of all, they research. They hopefully get in touch with a broker who can help guide them through it's a bit of a minefield. I would say landscape. It's more of a minefield at the moment. Get all their ducks in a row. I love an analogy. There's an awful lot of paperwork that you need to get sorted. You need to know what your credit score is. You need to have everything up to date, your ID, your passport, your bank statements. Please, please, please don't take out any big financial commitments if you're looking at taking on a mortgage, because they will show up on your credit file and it can make a big difference.
So it's doing the homework, if you like, then.
It is. It's boring, but necessary. That's why having someone on your side it makes the journey so much more enjoyable.
Sally Mitchell, mortgage advisor and broker. Really nice to speak to you today. Thank you for giving us some practical, helpful advice. Lots of you have been getting in touch with us with your views.
And Robert, first up, we need to have a more positive mental attitude to get through it all. Hopefully then our growth will get better and the economy will improve.
Jane says, I've heard a lot about mortgage payments, but there are so many renters who have been paying rent far in excess of mortgage payments for a long time now. Renters are totally ignored, in my opinion. Well, I'm pleased that I asked about renters for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done. Howard, Biden's White House and the IMF are no friends of Great Britain. And I think the IMF has been wrong about just about everything since as far back as I can remember. We now only need Tony Blair and Goldman Sachs to chip in, and we can be certain that Kwasi Kwarteng is exactly on the right track for the UK. Well, maybe that some of the Conservative MPs themselves don't agree with that, but there we are. Keep your views going, and we'll reflect GB views at gbnews.uk.
And the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has called for Parliament to be recalled to reverse the government's mini-budget after the pound fell sharply against the dollar again. Parliament not due to sit until the 11th of October.
The move by the Bank of England is very serious, and I think many people will now be extremely worried about their mortgage, about prices going up, and now about their pensions. The government has clearly lost control of the economy, and unlike other situations where it may be a world event, an unexpected event that causes this sort of crisis, this is self-inflicted. This was made in Downing Street last Friday. And for what? For uncosted tax breaks for those earning hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so what the government needs to do now is recall Parliament and abandon this budget before any more damage is done.
Catherine is still with us. What would be the process if they were able to do that? I mean, they'd presumably have to cancel or move the Tory party conference in Birmingham.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the conference runs from Sunday to Wednesday. They could recall straight after that.
Or Thursday. Tomorrow.
Indeed.
There's nothing tomorrow. There's nothing on Friday.
Right.
So there are days where there is no Parliament, there are no conferences. If they wanted to.
Obviously, people have to get back from their constituencies, but there's nothing to stop the parliamentary business.
I mean, I know our
starting.
transport system is challenging sometimes, but it's not that challenging.
Well, yeah, tell that to everyone trying to get back from Liverpool. So, I mean, it would be possible, but clearly, again, it's indicating this sense of crisis, so the government perhaps would not want that to happen.
Yes, I suspect the government would rather just steady as she goes.
Yeah.
Let's keep our heads down for now. But it's interesting that various people within the Conservative Party, not giving names, though, are saying Kwasi Kwarteng is toast and should go. But of course, he and Liz Truss are inextricably linked. Yeah. They, he hasn't dreamt these up on his own. She has done this with him. So you can't really remove him and leave her, she'd be horrendously damaged.
Do you think we will hear from... Parliament doesn't need to be recalled for us to hear from our Prime Minister or Chancellor as a nation. Do you think they might speak to us ahead of the Tory party conference? Because it's almost, it's about 4 or 5 days, isn't it, till they gather in Birmingham?
It does seem increasingly strange, doesn't it, this silence. We know that Kwasi Kwarteng's in meetings with investment banks and so on, but we don't know what Liz Truss is doing. We haven't heard from her. We haven't seen her. Where is she? It would be helpful, but of course, maybe at the moment, they don't quite know what to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know what the Chancellor might say, because, as you say, he's been speaking to the Bank of America, JP Morgan, Standard Chartered, Citi, UBS, Morgan Stanley and Bloomberg, all in a meeting with the Treasury, and apparently speaking in some detail. And there may be those people out there saying, well, why is he not doing that to the country?
Well, yes. Well, I suppose he would say, well, what I need to do is calm the markets, and make sure that the markets are on board. But certainly, I mean, this is not just a thing that's happening in the City of London. This is something that's worrying people up and down the country. People's mortgages being pulled. It's very concerning for all of us, isn't it? And it would be good to hear from them.
We're going to chat with you more. We're going to hear from businesses. We're going to hear from households across the UK. But now it's time for your weather.
Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. A chilly feel again out there today. A mixture of sun and showers, but some places seeing a lot of showers. Quite a few of us actually just staying dry and fine. Low pressure is controlling our weather, but it's sitting out to the east and the winds are still mostly coming down from the north. Perhaps not quite as strong as recent days, but still bringing a chilly feel. And this weather front in particular bringing plenty of showers to parts of eastern Scotland this morning, but increasingly they'll push down across parts of northeast England this afternoon and through this evening. A few showers certainly for Wales and southwest England. 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland, much of western Scotland, the Midlands, southeast England, though staying dry and bright. But it isn't warm temperatures, struggling to get up to 16, 17, and certainly feeling colder as it turns wetter across northeast England. A pretty grim end to the day in Newcastle and Middlesbrough, and that rain expanding across northern England this evening and then spreading southwards through the early hours across the Midlands into parts of Wales and eventually into southern England too. Away from that little curl of rain, many places will be dry overnight. Some showers keeping going in western Scotland. Temperatures down into single figures. So another cool start to the day on Thursday. We start also with a lot of cloud and some rain initially across parts of southern England. That should fade fairly quickly in the morning. And then apart from a few showers coming into northeast England and southern parts of Scotland, much of the country will be dry. And again, we'll see some sunny spells. But again, temperatures will be mostly a little below average for the time of year. But the winds will be lighter, so again, it won't feel perhaps quite as chilly as it has done for the early part of the week. Still a few showers drifting into the Midlands on Thursday evening, but otherwise most places dry until this area of rain arrives in the northwest. That is from a fairly active weather system that's coming steaming in from the Atlantic. The weather front's bringing a spell of heavy rain during Friday and the isobars squeezing together, so it's going to get windy as well.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me!
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Bank of England's announced emergency measures in a bid to stabilise currency and debt markets. The bank says if dysfunction in the market continues or worsens, then there'll be material risk to the UK's financial stability. The Treasury says the government will continue to work closely with the bank following what they called significant volatility in recent days. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves is calling on the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, to make an emergency statement.
The move by the Bank of England is very serious, and I think many people will now be extremely worried about their mortgage, about prices going up, and now about their pensions. The government has clearly lost control of the economy, and unlike other situations where it may be a world event, an unexpected event that causes this sort of crisis, this is self-inflicted. This was made in Downing Street last Friday. And for what? For uncosted tax breaks for those earning hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so what the government needs to do now is recall Parliament and abandon this budget before any more damage is done.
That was the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer. Now, earlier today, Mr Kwarteng told investment bankers the government's committed to what he called fiscal responsibility. The Chancellor's trying to reassure city investors of his economic plan after International Monetary Fund criticised the government's mini-budget. In a rare statement issued last night, the IMF, which monitors economies around the world, warned the Chancellor's economic plans would likely increase inequality in the UK. The deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, has accused the Conservatives of going from the party of stability to causing earthquakes. She made the speech on the final day of their party conference. The events now come to a close after Labour spent much of the last 2 days setting out their plans for the UK economy. Final speeches including plans for GPs in England to give face-to-face appointments to every patient and a pledge for every primary school child to have access to a breakfast club.
An unequal economy is an inefficient one. It's perhaps the starkest difference between us and the Tories. Never again can we let them pretend that they are the patriotic party. I love my country. That's why I want so much better
Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney met at Hillsborough Castle to try to rebuild the partnership that splintered the Irish government. Well, the aim was to find an agreement by the end of next month which would allow an executive to be formed and a devolved government to function again in Northern Ireland. The Irish Foreign Minister says they'll put compromises in place that the parties can live with.
The focus of our discussions really has been to rebuild a partnership approach that really has been the foundation of the peace agreement that happened nearly 25 years ago, where when there are difficulties and problems, the two governments, through the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Irish Foreign Minister, work together to try to put compromises in place that parties can live with. I believe it is absolutely doable for us to get that work done.
The President of the EU Commission and NATO say the leaks in the major gas pipeline that runs between Russia and Europe were sabotage. Ursula von der Leyen also said any deliberate disruption of active European energy infrastructure is unacceptable and it would lead to the strongest possible response. Seismologists in Denmark and Sweden have said they registered 2 powerful blasts on Monday in the area of the leaks. The Danish Defence Minister says it can take up to 2 weeks before they can investigate. The minister says that the sabotage was planned.
This is not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It was planned and huge explosions were used.
A hurricane in the US has been made a Category 4 storm. That means it's catastrophic. It's currently heading towards Florida. Hurricane Ian has now maximum sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. 2.5 million people in the state are under evacuation orders as the storm sweeps across the coast. It's expected to cause devastating damage and is on track to hit land somewhere along Florida's Gulf Coast today. The US President Joe Biden says the military's been deployed.
My administration is on alert and in action to help the people of Florida. I've approved Florida's request for emergency assistance immediately upon receiving it from the governor when they received it. And I directed my team to surge federal assistance there before the storm hit. FEMA has already deployed 700 personnel to Florida, and the governor has activated 5,000 state National Guard with another 2,000 guards coming from other states.
You're now up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more developments as they happen. Now, let's go back to Newsday.
The pound is falling, slumping by nearly 1.6% against the US dollar following announcements that the Bank of England will intervene in markets.
Yeah, something of a bad day for Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor. He started his morning with warnings from the IF and the White House criticising the UK government's tax plans, fiscal plans.
But the Chancellor is reiterating that he is underlining the government's clear commitment to fiscal discipline and is working closely with the Governor of the Bank of England and Office of Budget Responsibility ahead of his medium-term fiscal plan. That's a budget on the 23rd of November.
Maxi budget this time, maybe?
It's proper one, the full shebang.
What does this all mean? I hear you cry. Joining us on the show now on the programme is Dr. Eamon Butler, who is director of the Adam Smith Institute, which is, of course, a think tank promoting freedom from poverty through free market economics and economic growth. Doesn't seem to be quite working in terms of the market reaction at the moment, of course.
Well, the markets never like anything that's unexpected, and I don't think they were expecting that the Chancellor would do everything that he's been talking about, but do it all at once. And I think the markets, if you like, have got used to easy money and cheap credit and living in this kind of fantasy land. But there comes a time when reality has to reassert itself, and quite frankly, we can't go on as we are. We need lower taxes, we need spending cuts, we need major reform of the civil service. The Chancellor hasn't announced those plans yet, but certainly the spending and reform plans are being talked about right now. Right. So we've got to do all of these things, and I think the markets have just had it easy for a long time, and asset prices have gone up and property prices have gone up because of the cheap credit and easy money. And you can't live like that forever, unfortunately.
So is that the problem, that Kwasi Kwarteng didn't announce everything in the round, that he's done it in two parts with the next part coming in November?
Well, I think probably the main problem that spooked the markets is that they are a lot of people. I think, like the IMF, for example, are including all of the all of the promises not to raise taxes. That's the thing. The Chancellor is cutting tax. He's cutting income taxes for everybody, and he's doing some other tax cuts. But he's also said that he's not going to be doing the tax increases that his predecessor had in mind. And I think people have thought that, oh, this is a massive tax cut. In fact, it's a sizable tax cut, but it's not as massive as all that. So I think eventually the markets will come to realise, oh yes, in fact,
okay.
this is
Dr. Raymond Butler, just talk us through the theory of or the practice of what the government are trying to do. Tell us how, if you cut taxes, not just for those who are struggling, but for those who are some of the best off in our society, and also remove the cap on bankers' bonuses so they can earn more. Just talk us through the theory of how this leads to growth for all of us. You're from the Adam Smith Institute, you're on the right economically, but this is based on economic theory. It's something that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are following. Talk us through how it works, or is intended to work.
It's actually based on economic practicality, because if you raise your taxes beyond certain limits, people will simply stop paying them. They'll either leave the country, or they'll quit work, or they'll find ways to avoid or evade taxes. So very high taxes, like the top rates that has just been cut, these things are a real disincentive to people. And the bankers' bonuses, for example, what the government is trying to do is to attract bankers back to London and Edinburgh, rather than have them in Frankfurt and New York. So it's bringing trade in. If you allow people the opportunity to make money and to keep the money that they earn, then they will work harder. They'll come to the UK, and there's an incentive in them to prosper, and that benefits everybody, because they pay tax, of course, and that funds public services. So it makes the poorer people better off as well. So in a rising economy, it's the poor actually who benefit most. It's them whose standards of living increase most dramatically, not the rich. So you need a dynamic, growing economy, and that's the theory behind this, and it's the practicality behind this that does actually work. If you simply try to make everybody equal, it doesn't work. You get equal poverty.
One of the central beliefs, of course, of the Adam Smith Institute is that you can't buck the markets. Given what's happening, particularly with the pound on the currency markets, how much time has the government got, given that we're down to, 106 against the dollar this morning?
Yes, but I mean, the pound, like the euro, has been sliding against the dollar all year, in fact. A little increase at the weekend, that's absolutely true. But yes, if you've been living high on the hog, if you've been living off cheap credit and interest rates almost zero, in fact, they're still negative, even 4 or 5%. It's still negative when inflation is 11%. So the bank is paying you to borrow their money. That's ridiculous. And the Bank of England, monetary policy, printing money, and then to get over bad times, and then not doing anything about it when things slowly improve a bit. That's a fantasy land, and you just can't live on that. So you've got to have the reality at some point, and it's going to be tough. That's absolutely true. We know that, but it's not the Chancellor that's the problem. It's everything that's happened in the last 20 years that's the problem.
And that might take some time to discuss. But Dr. Raymond Butler from the Adam Smith Institute, thank you very much for your time here on GB Newsday. Thanks very much.
Well, potential house buyers are rushing to secure mortgages before a predicted rise in interest rates.
Yes, of course, just to remind you, the bank meeting next in November, and we could see another substantial rise according to what we're hearing. And it comes after the Bank of England said it would not hesitate to hike rates after the pound hit those record lows.
And some lenders are clawing back mortgage deals for new customers. How easy will it be to buy a new property? Alice Porter has been finding out for us.
Serena is a 24-year-old charity worker hoping to buy her first property. She's urgently trying to secure a mortgage before interest rates increase even further.
My mortgage broker actually proactively called me this morning saying that she'd been advising all of her clients to get on the ladder now and just get in there, get a mortgage agreement, because interest rates are only going to go up and property prices are only going to go up. And the last thing I want to do is make a rod for my own back and wait too long, and everything's much more expensive than it is now.
So we've recently heard that some mortgage deals are being withdrawn by mortgage providers, by building societies. Is that making you feel quite panicked about your decision?
I'd rather have the time to explore my options a bit more, because right now I am restricted in that I can pretty much only get a 1-bed, and I was looking at, if I wait a couple of months I could maybe save up a little bit more and get a 2-bed, but now that option's just been completely taken away.
But not everyone can easily exchange on properties at the moment. For the hundreds and thousands of people who own properties with unsafe cladding, like Paul Afshar, they're unable to sell their homes amid spiralling costs.
In 2007, when I bought my flat, the interest on my mortgage rate was 3.5%. As of September, it's now well over 5%, and that's only going to keep going up. A big part of the problem was that I got a bad deal on my mortgage originally because I was a first-time buyer and I was buying through the government shared ownership scheme. And that bad deal, unfortunately, is coming back to haunt me with the very real and very scary prospect of spiralling costs thanks to continued interest rate rises.
Some economists have predicted that the Bank of England will raise interest rates to 5.8% by spring, which will make it less attractive to buy a new property. At the same time,
today we have cut stamp duty.
The Chancellor's announcement that stamp duty is being cut shows that the government is trying to fuel the housing market. The question is, will it benefit people if they can't afford the mortgage repayments in the first place? But estate agents are calling for calm after a turbulent few days and say even with the increases, interest rates are still low.
The biggest problems people had during Brexit times, financial crisis times and so on, was they couldn't afford to buy properties. It was a case of lenders weren't lending. So now it's a case of lenders are still lending, interest rates are still low. There is obviously concern with the market or where the market's heading, but ultimately, if something's at the right price, buyers should be buying.
For many buyers, their conundrum now is whether to fix their interest rates or wait to see if the forecasts are wrong. Alice Porter, GB News.
Joined now by Ray Bulger, who's a senior mortgage manager with John Charcoal. Hi there, good to talk to you. If you are one of those who doesn't have a fixed rate mortgage or your fixed rate is coming to an end soon, what should you do?
Well, I think the first thing to mention is the impact the Bank of England announcement this morning has had on the market. The bank came in this morning and said it would be buying long-dated gilts until a fortnight's time, and that's pushed the yield on the 30-year gilt down by a whole 1 percentage point, which means that it's now yielding pretty well the same as it was before the budget. So effectively what's happened is the Bank of England has bailed out the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. So if you're looking for a new mortgage, the situation today is not looking as bleak as it was yesterday.
Ray, we're also getting the indication from the Bank of England, of course, at its next meeting, the Monetary Policy Committee, that it may have to push rates up again by, a substantial amount, we're hearing.
Yes, we were always expecting that. I think the other interesting point in this morning's announcement is that the bank has reiterated that it doesn't plan to raise rates until its November meeting. But I think the likelihood is then we're going to see rates go up probably by a full percentage point. That's still going to leave short-term rates well below the sort of longer-term rates are. So the cost of a fixed-rate mortgage is dictated effectively, largely by what the government has to pay for its borrowing. And because the yield on gilts has gone up so much since the budget, although, as I said earlier, come back down a long way because of the Bank of England's action this morning. That means the cost of money to lenders has gone up a lot, and clearly, therefore, they have to charge more to their borrowers. We've already seen a lot of lenders pull rates, put rates up, and I'm sure there's still more of that to come because not every lender has so far taken that action. But I think the announcement from the bank today and the action it's taking is actually going to mitigate that situation, so it doesn't look quite as bleak now for borrowers as it did yesterday.
What about house prices? How bleak does it look for house prices?
Yeah, I think that is still going to be an issue. The comment earlier from a broker who said house prices only go up, that's just not right. House prices, of course, can go both ways, and the biggest impact on house prices tends to be the cost of borrowing money to finance them. And because everybody has got so used to mortgage rates being so low for the last 10 years or so, and we've now got a steep increase, well, that's going to have a much bigger effect on psychologically on what people are prepared to pay than it would have done if we'd have seen a gradual rise in interest rates over several years. So I think that with the combination of the big increase in energy costs plus a big increase in mortgage costs when people move, we are going to see an impact on house prices. And it can only be a guess because we don't know what's going to happen. But I do think we'll see prices fall by about 10% from where they are now by the end of next year.
Could that mean that all those people who are struggling to get a mortgage product at the moment and trying to sort of lock in rates could even face negative equity then in next year?
Well, not many are going to face negative equity. What you've got to bear in mind is that we've seen house prices rise by about 20% over the last 2 years. So, if my suggestion of a 10% fall proves to be accurate, that still means prices are 10% higher than they were at the start of COVID. So even if you took out a 95% loan-to-value mortgage, you'll have typically paid back about 4 or 5% of that mortgage over the first 2 or 3 years. So not many people are actually going to be in negative equity. And now, despite the fact that some people will no doubt have problems when they come to the end of their current fixed rate, meeting the higher payments they will have to make, on the plus side, most people will have equity in their property. So although clearly they're going to regard it as a last resort to have to sell the property, if they're really going to be struggling to meet their mortgage payments, what they must really avoid is getting into debt, not being able to meet their commitments, getting a bad credit record, which will then actually put them in a really difficult situation for years to come. Yeah. So one of the differences between the market now and in the 1990s is that people can sell if they need to because they'll have equity.
And let's be fair to the government, they have cut stamp duty. That will help the housing market, won't it?
Well, it will certainly help the lower end of the market. It obviously helps everyone to some extent, but proportionately, it's a much bigger help to first-time buyers and people at the lower end. So for first-time buyers, the two challenges tend to be finding the deposit, which obviously includes the stamp duty, and now there's no stamp duty to pay up to $425,000 for most people. That's an extra saving. The question then is, can they afford the higher mortgage rates that they're now going to have to pay? But on the plus side, I believe they will benefit from lower house prices over the next year. And the other important thing is that if you see house prices going up and you're a first-time buyer and you're worried about missing the boat, there's a big temptation to actually jump in on something which you think's okay, but perhaps not quite right. Now you don't need to do that. You can actually take your time, wait to find the right property, and as long as you can afford the monthly payments, then you're likely to be in a much better position for the future.
Words of wisdom. Ray, thank you very much. Ray, a Senior Mortgage Manager with John Charcoal. Thanks very much for your time.
OK, thank you.
Well, we will be back with more analysis after a short break when we'll hear from our business and economics editor about what all this means to you.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. Now let's head north of the border where SNP ministers are facing yet more questions over a controversial decision to allow the shipbuilders Ferguson Marine a £97 million contract to build 2 ferries in Port Glasgow.
They were handed the contract to construct the vessels in 2015, despite there being concerns that they didn't offer value for money.
Well, neither of those ferries have yet been finished. The cost of the project increasing massively, now 5 years late and £150 million over budget.
The SNP government is facing accusations of giving preferential treatment in the ferry contract to Ferguson Marine. Joining us now on the show is Edward Mountain, who's a Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament. Edward, before we talk about the ferries, may I just ask you to ask your view on whether we need, as a nation, to hear from the Chancellor or the Prime Minister, Liz Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng, to just reassure us all that they have confidence that despite the naysayers and the markets, that their economic plan is on course to deliver for us all. Don't we all need to hear from them?
I don't think we do need to hear from them. What we've heard at the moment, we've heard a plan that's been put forward to jumpstart the British economy, which has been stagnating for the last few years, and we need to get it moving. They put forward a plan, and I'm looking forward to seeing it work. There are unintended pressures on that plan from the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the energy prices, and the Bank of England is dealing with those pressures by stabilising the market, which is at the moment fluctuating because of Russia's actions. So I think we're on course. They've laid forward a sensible plan, and it's a Conservative plan.
Well, very, very quickly, aren't the markets actually fluctuating because they're looking at the amount of government debt?
Well, government debt's always an issue, and you know, government debt after COVID was an issue, and we're going to have to address it. But we have an option. We either increase debt or we tax people more, and taxing people more has never proven to get the economy moving in the direction we want it to.
OK, let's talk about the ferry contract. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, has said ministers were not aware of any impropriety in the procurement process, while also saying allegations will be looked into. So they say no impropriety, but of course we'll investigate. That you couldn't ask for more, could you?
You could ask for a bit of honesty. I mean, what we've seen in the tendering process is the first mandatory requirement of a builder's refund guarantee, which all yards had to complete to get even into the first round. And we found out that in December, before even the first round had completed, that the tenderer that eventually ended up with the contract said that they couldn't produce one. Now, are you telling me that the Scottish Government didn't know that they would have to underwrite all the losses if that
contract was awarded to Ferguson Marine, which is what's happened. I mean, it's mind-blowing to think that, losses which now we know equate to £150 million are being picked up by the government because there was no builder's guarantee. Don't tell me they didn't know that. That's not possible. It's not feasible and it's not sensible.
And where are we with the ferries? I mean, we understand some of the Western Isles have had to ration supplies. The first time that's happened since the Second World War, because clearly the existing ferries are breaking down and they need these new vessels urgently.
And we've heard just today, literally just before I came on air, I was passed a document saying that the second ferry, which was due to be delivered at the end of next year, now won't be delivered for another year late. That's making it up to 7 years we've been waiting for these ferries. And islanders deserve better. If we're going to keep people living on the island and we're going to look after their health, they've got to be able to get on and off the island. And at the moment, they're not being able to do that.
Is there any way that process can be speeded up? I mean, are there engineering, technical issues to blame?
I don't think there is a way of speeding up the build of the ferries, but there are options to rent ferries, and the Scottish Government have been given options, and they haven't decided to take them up. So, I don't know what the problem is. I don't understand why they can't get round a table and get a rented ferry onto the routes if that's what we need. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced if the First Minister's car broke down and she needed to get to the Parliament, a car would be rented for her. But it's a pity they can't do that for islanders.
Edward Mountain, Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament, thank you very much indeed for updating us. And, of course, we'll speak to you again on that. Thank you very much.
And now we can go to Liam Halligan for the latest in what some have described as some turmoil in the markets this morning, but signs that that turmoil could be slowing because the Bank of England have acted, Liam.
They have indeed. What we've seen today, Gloria, is really the first rung on the ladder of emergency measures. There's no emergency interest rate rise, which many people were calling for yesterday to support the value of the pound. There's no reversal from the government either in terms of its so-called mini budget measures. Crikey, bit of a misnomer with a mini budget given its impact. So no reversal from ministers on their tax measures. What we have seen is the Bank of England moving to do what's called a technical operation in the gilt market. That's the market for government debt. The Bank of England was due to be trying to buy gilts, to sell gilts into the market. Instead, they're reversing that and they're actually buying gilts, buying government debt in order to support government borrowing so the government can borrow more cheaply at a lower level of interest rate to stop higher interest rates rippling out across the economy. For now, Gloria, and I stress it is for now, the currency seems to be relatively firm. It's staying around $1.06, roughly where it was this morning. And the technical measure, what we call the 10-year gilt yield, the amount of money it costs the government to borrow for 10 years, that's fallen after this Bank of England announcement from about 4.5% to 4%. So for now at least, this emergency measure, it is an emergency measure, though a minor emergency measure, if that isn't a contradiction in terms, seems to be doing what the Bank of England was hoping it would do for now.
The Treasury, Liam, of course, was saying that there'll be more to come in terms of the growth plans in November. What we may get as a major event, we don't know. But Paul Johnson, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, saying that he may have to try to freeze spending on public services to actually balance those books.
Potentially. Look, the extra tax cuts that were announced in this mini budget, the tax cuts that Liz Truss wasn't talking about during her leadership election for weeks and weeks, the tax cuts that the financial markets didn't know about, amount to around £7 billion. I mean, that's serious money, but it's not huge money in terms of the grand scheme of things when it comes to the public finances. But Paul Johnson, he runs the Institute for Fiscal Studies. He's a highly respected analyst, of course, and it may be that even if those tax changes, particularly the top rate of tax, weren't the immediate cause of this impact on financial markets. Some people would say it's because the Bank of England behind me has been so slow to raise interest rates. That's a discussion for the historians. That's not a discussion for today, but it will be very much on the mind of policymakers. Paul Johnson may be right. It may be that the government has to make a very significant gesture, give the market a signal that it really gets it. Something like reversing its policy stance in terms of the top rate of tax. Even some resignations, who knows? Because in the end, financial markets, they're not just about the numbers, they're also about politics and perception. And the perception is that the UK government now is under pressure in terms of its tax plans, and the Bank of England's had to move to shore up particularly the market for government debt, so pension funds are able to maintain the stability that we need here in the UK.
Liam, you're getting a beat from the traffic, which is good news, I guess, outside the Bank of England there. Thanks very much indeed for updating us. Thank you.
Coming up after the break, fears over a so-called twin-demic. That's the spread of both flu and COVID. Doctors are urging elderly and other vulnerable people to get fully vaccinated.
Let's get an update first on the news headlines. Here's Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. 2:34 here now on GB News. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Labour leaders demanding that MPs return to Westminster and that the government recalls Parliament to address the current financial situation. It's after the Bank of England has announced intervention measures in an attempt to stabilise the market, saying if the market continues in such a dysfunctional manner or gets worse, there'll be material risk to UK's financial stability. The Treasury says the government will continue to work closely with the bank following what they called significant volatility in recent days. Describing the instability as an act of economic self-harm from the Conservatives, Sir Keir Starmer said the other party must now abandon their policies.
The move by the Bank of England is very serious, and I think many people will now be extremely worried about their mortgage, about prices going up, and now about their pensions. The government has clearly lost control of the economy, and unlike other situations where it may be a world event, an unexpected event that causes this sort of crisis, this is self-inflicted. This was made in Downing Street last Friday. And for what? For uncosted tax breaks for those earning hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so what the government needs to do now is recall Parliament and abandon this budget before any more damage is done.
Earlier today, Mr Kwarteng, the Chancellor, told investment bankers the government is committed to what he called fiscal responsibility. He's trying to reassure city investors of his economic plan after the International Monetary Fund criticised the government's mini-budget. In a rare statement issued last night, the IMF, who monitor economies around the world, warned that the Chancellor's plans would likely increase inequality in the UK. Well, the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, has accused the Conservatives of not caring about the working classes in her closing speech at the party conference. The event's finished now after Labour spent much of the last 2 days setting out their plans for the economy. Well, final speeches today included plans for GPs in England to give face-to-face appointments to every patient and a pledge for every primary school child to have access to a breakfast club. TV online, DAB+ radio, it's GB News. Don't go anywhere. Newsday will be back shortly.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio. And online. We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, has said Parliament should be recalled to reverse the government's mini-budget after the pound fell sharply against the dollar.
Well, John, the move by the Bank of England is very serious. And I think many people will now be extremely worried about their mortgage, about prices going up, and now about their pensions. The government has clearly lost control of the economy. And unlike other situations where it may be a world event, an unexpected event that causes this sort of crisis, this is self-inflicted. This was made in Downing Street last Friday. And for what? For uncosted tax breaks for those earning hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so what the government needs to do now is recall Parliament and abandon this budget before any more damage is done.
Sir Keir Starmer at the end of the Labour conference, of course, in Liverpool, but we've got the Tory conference to come in Birmingham, which is why at the moment Parliament is not sitting. Let's get some reaction and a review, of course, of where we are. Chris Lloyd, who's chief features writer at the Northern Echo, joins us now. Thanks very much indeed for your time, Chris. How are your readers going to react to this, and how, in fact, are you going to present it? A little local difficulty or a full-blown crisis?
Well, it's becoming a full-blown crisis, I think, and I think people are genuinely really concerned about what is going on now. We've had a huge impact on people's pay, salaries and things due to the fuel crisis, and now people are seeing mortgages going up at a couple of £300 a month as well, on top of their fuel payments and their petrol payments, and on top of their food prices as well. So this really is not just a little local difficulty, not just a weird Westminster bubble story. This is important stuff that affects everybody's day-to-day lives.
The government would say they've introduced cost of living payments, they have introduced an energy price cap, they have reversed the national insurance rise, they have cut income tax for everybody, not just the rich. Are they getting any credit for the not insignificant things they have done?
No, I think you're quite right there, because we were crying out for the fuel cap and the assistance there, and that did come along, and it was originally perceived as being at the upper end of what they were expected to do. So that was a good thing. But the latest complete turmoil and the unexpected 45p income tax cut as well, that has just kind of blown all that other good work out of the water. And this is what people are now talking about. This mortgage thing is completely unexpected, I think, for many people, and it's going to cost them potentially hundreds of pounds a month.
We've got sort of Labour setting out its stall, but clearly the other part of the political equation is all those red wall seats that the Tories won. Are you getting any feedback from those Tory MPs in the northern towns and cities as to what their thoughts are?
Well, the couple that I've spoken to, I think it's fair to say that they've lost their kind of effervescence. Their MPs are always very upbeat and positive sort of people, and always kind of banging the party line. But they aren't so bubbly at all about what is going on now. And I think I'm coming to you from a real red wall area where a couple of our seats fell in 2019 to the Tories from Labour for the first time since 1885 in some some cases. And so that was a real history. And it's fascinating to see the way things are changing now, because the Tories have suddenly become very, very definable for Labour, because under Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party was a bit difficult for Labour to oppose because of Johnson's personality. They were opposing him as a personality that people really rather liked in these red wall areas. And so he was just a bit of an amorphous blonde blob, really. And it was difficult for Labour to characterise how they were different for him. But now the Tories have really defined themselves. They are thought of as raising the bankers' caps and on reducing the 45p income tax rate, which doesn't really affect a place like the northeast of England here. There are only 8,000 higher rate taxpayers in the whole of the northeast, and I guess most of them play for Newcastle United. So we can now see, or the people in the Red Wall are beginning to see, that the Tories are looking are looking completely different from the party that was so appealing to them when Boris Johnson was the leader.
Is it actually moving votes? Were you able to detect in places like you're speaking to us from, like Darlington, when those lifelong Labour voters moved away and gave a chance to the Tories? Are you certain that you can detect a definite move back to Labour, or is it still the jury's out on Labour?
No, the jury's still out on Labour. I think so. You've asked a really fascinating question, because the drift from Labour to Conservative, I've been watching it happen for kind of 20 years, really, as people went to independent candidates and then the whole hog over towards the Conservatives because of the Boris Johnson and the Brexit type of issues. So you can't see that the tide has turned completely the other way now. But what is interesting is because the Conservatives have defined themselves in a particular way, and because Labour is now beginning to be heard. Keir Starmer was very bland and he wasn't making any impact at all. But the conference, I do think, has kind of changed that a little bit. And I was really interested in his conference speech. We had the singing of the national anthem, of course, as well. There was a degree of patriotism. And that was one of the things this area really didn't like about Jeremy Corbyn, was that they felt he wasn't proud of his country. And yet the Queen's funeral has shown that we're all kind of gently patriotic people. And I wondered whether Keir Starmer was tapping into that with his talk of Britain leading the world as a green force, and then the brilliantly named GB Energy. I wonder where he got that idea, I say, as I talk to GBNews. But it's a really nicely kind of gently patriotic thing. And people perhaps in these red wall areas are beginning to think, well, he is different from Jeremy Corbyn. It's not the same Islington type party as we didn't vote for in 2019, and the Tories have changed as well. So you can see that those decisions that were made are now being reviewed.
Chris, it sounds as if you've got your next features piece already written. Thanks very much indeed for joining us there. Chief Features Writer at the Northern Echo in Darlington. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Catherine, Chris made an interesting point there. In the North East, you've got some really sort of passionate new red wall MPs. I'm thinking about Richard Holden, Deanna Davison, people who really come out and defend their government. In fact, I think they both backed Liz Truss in the leadership. Deanna certainly did. Yeah. Where are people like that now? You need them on the airwaves. You need them to be defending this programme, because, of course, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng wouldn't have introduced these measures if they didn't believe that they would lead to growth and benefit everybody in the long term.
No, absolutely. They've done it believing it is in Britain's best interest, that this is the way forward. And, I mean, if we think back, it's only a week ago, it feels like forever, to Liz Truss at the top of the Empire State Building saying, yes, I am prepared to make unpopular decisions because it will be, basically, you'll take your medicine, it will be good for you. You might not like it, but it will be good for you. I know what's best. And now here we are. But I think it is significant, the silence from people that have backed her, do back her, and Kwasi Kwarteng are in government. And where are they? Lots of concern, Conservative MPs saying, we need to hear from Kwasi Kwarteng. We need to, the public, the population need to hear a message of reassurance from the Prime Minister, from the Chancellor, and as yet that is not forthcoming.
You were also indicating to us, because of course they're all heading to Birmingham on Sunday for a Tory party conference where perhaps they'll try and fill out the gaps on how they'll get the growth going. But you're saying some very big hitters, senior figures, are not going to be attending.
Yes, so Rishi Sunak will not be there. I imagine that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng will breathe a sigh of relief. But of course, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you'd want to be presenting a united front. Sajid Javid will not be there. David Davis will not be there. Mel Stride will not be there. Those are just ones that we know about at the moment. But for a new government, OK, we're 12 years into Conservative government, but it does feel like a new regime. And they would want to have people that hadn't backed Liz Truss for leadership sitting supportively,
and pulling together towards a new general election, of course, which might be less than 2 years away.
And they obviously feel that they can't do that.
Interesting times, as you say, even 3 weeks into a new government. Catherine, thank you for your expert analysis, as ever.
Well, the UK Health Security Agency has warned of a possible difficult winter of flu and COVID circulating widely.
Yes, it's a so-called twindemic. They say it could be compounded by lower levels of natural immunity to flu because of the COVID lockdowns. So health officials encouraging the clinically vulnerable and elderly to receive both COVID and flu jabs together in light of the risk.
Well, Professor of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial College London, Azim Majid, joins us now. How worried, let's take them both in turn. First of all, how worried are we about a resurgence of COVID?
Hello, Gloria. I think it's very likely we'll see more waves of COVID this winter. We saw big waves last year and the previous year, so I think we will see another wave of COVID in the autumn and winter. But hopefully with vaccination, we can keep down the number of serious cases and deaths to a level where we don't need any more measures being brought in by the government to control the pandemic.
And of course, let's reflect, flu can be as dangerous, if not more so, than COVID, particularly if you have underlying conditions, of course. And we remember the Spanish flu outbreak back in 1918 that killed millions. Is it the case that we've lost the natural immunity because we've all been shut away for 2 years?
It is the case that for the past 2 years we've had very low rates of flu, and that does mean people have got less immunity to flu this winter than in previous years. We also have more mixing of people this winter, so unlike the last 2 years, there's no measures brought in to mix social events, etc. Encourage home working, so we will see more mixing of people, and that will also drive up flu rates as well this winter.
So how important is it for people to get a vaccine? Haven't we all got vaccine fatigue?
I think we have got vaccine fatigue in the population, but I do think it's essential for people to get vaccinated. So if you're over 50 or in a high-risk group, if you've got a long-term health condition, you're a healthcare worker, you're a carer, very important you get your flu vaccine and your COVID vaccine this autumn. I've had both my vaccines, and I encourage everyone else to get their vaccines as well.
Are the public health officials and the doctors actually giving the double jab in one, then, when you go to get your booster this autumn?
That's right, yeah. So most people are getting both jabs together. So I had my 2 jabs at the same time, one jab in each arm. So that is more convenient for people and therefore encourages a better take-up of both vaccines.
More people actually seeing a jab taking place at the moment, which Gloria is shying away from.
I'm absolutely needle phobic, but I am vaccinated, but not without a good bit of drama. Now, we've all, well, so many of us, most of us have had COVID. It does seem that the strains are getting weaker. Can we take any hope that if each strain becomes weaker, and actually even if COVID levels do rise come the winter, we're not going to be see the corresponding level of hospitalisations and deaths?
Yeah, it's the case. We've been lucky. The last few variants have been less serious than earlier variants, but there's no guarantee that will occur in the future. We may see a variant that is more deadly than current variants, so vaccination remains very important in suppressing serious cases and deaths. So yes, let's hope we get milder variants in the future, but that's not something that we can guarantee.
Have you been jabbed yet yourself?
Yes, I've had both my flu and COVID jabs about 2 weeks ago, so I'm fully prepared for this winter.
Excellent. I think I got mine on Friday, so
have you?
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, Professor Azim Majid, for joining us at Imperial College. Thanks for your time.
I've never had a flu jab. Are these painful?
Well, what's worrying me is having the 2-in-1. So, you know, I'm not at work at Friday because I might not be able to operate the computer. I've got one in there, and sort of, you know. Anyway, there we are. Hopefully we'll all stay well this autumn.
Now, the EU has said that 2 major gas leaks in the Nord Stream pipeline that exports gas from Russia to Europe were caused by sabotage, but they've not directly accused Russia.
Well, yet, anyway. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, saying that the deliberate disruption would result in the strongest possible response, while Ukraine went further, accusing Russia of a terrorist attack.
Joining us now from Berlin is Ben Aris, who's the former Russia reporter for the Daily Telegraph. Deliberate disruption would result in the strongest possible response, said the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, but they've stopped short of directly accusing Russia. Why?
Well, there's no evidence to indicate who did this, but certainly it was no accident either. I mean, the fact you have actually 4 strands, 3 of which were ruptured all at the same time, slightly different times actually, and the Swedish Seismological Service came out and said there was definitely an explosion and not an earthquake. So, you know, there is a perpetrator here. And this is the main gas pipeline from Russia to Germany. It hasn't been delivering any gas for the last month due to the various disputes, but taking it out of action completely. And the German authorities have just said that they think the pipelines are destroyed forever. They cannot be repaired. Then you take out of the equation a potential source of gas energy that could be called on later in the winter, when the depths of the winter, when the tanks start to run out. And that's a very serious threat. The prices for gas spiked by 20% yesterday on the news of this. And so now everyone's trying to work out exactly what went on.
Yeah, I mean, even talks about underwater drones being used by the Russians. But I was going to ask you, why would they do this? I mean, is it a further weaponization of control of gas, even though it means they can't deliver any, even if a deal is done?
I think gas has been weaponized, and the sort of on-off nature of the deliveries has sent the prices up. And I think actually that's the key, is that Putin is now trying to stoke the fear of an energy crisis, which is already well underway. I mean, you have to remember that the prices are already 10 times higher than normal. And you're seeing that in the UK with the gas bills going up, and it's also fueling inflation, which is hitting people in the pocket. And we're in an economic war with Russia, and this is how they're fighting it. I think in the sort of broader picture that it's clear that Russia has lost Europe as a market for its gas permanently. I mean, even though Europe is still dependent on importing some, it's going to stop that as soon as it can. And by doing this, I think what the Kremlin's done is stoked fears again, sending the prices up again, just at the beginning of the heating season, at a time when all the measures that you were discussing earlier about energy price caps, when they've come in and actually brought the gas prices down in the last few weeks. In Germany, they came down to close to pre-war levels, and now they've gone shooting back up to from 200 to 2,000 again.
So clearly, perhaps that was actually aimed at pushing that back up then.
Yeah. I mean, it's his weapon, isn't it? I mean, there's not much that Russia can do to the West. The only thing they export is gas. But because Putin controls all these commodity prices, in effect, that he can make the cost of living shoot up in the West to a point where he's hoping it's so painful that the populations will turn to their politicians and say, look, we're tired of this, make a deal with Russia, make peace in Ukraine. We've had enough. We can't afford this ourselves.
How do we get to the bottom of what's happening? You've got Ukraine accusing Russia of a terrorist attack. You've got a Kremlin spokesperson saying they're extremely concerned about the leaks, adding that the possibility of a deliberate attack could not be ruled out. How do you make sense of two completely contradictory positions?
The trouble with this is the protagonists, they all have good reasons to do it. I mean, immediately people thought that said that this was a Ukrainian special operation. And then very quickly, people were saying that the Kremlin blew up its own pipeline in order to precipitate this energy crisis. You talk to the Russian side, and not only, and they're saying that the Americans did it because America has a big business interest in selling LNG to Europe. And without this pipeline, it's going to pick up 50 billion cubic meters, which is a lot. That has to come with LNG. And, you know, swimming through all these conspiracy theories this morning, I mean, there's no way to decide. The logic does point to Russia. It seems the most likely.
Ben, thank you for that. We'll have to leave it there. We're out of time, but thank you very much indeed for bringing us that from Berlin. Thanks for your time.
And that's it from us for today. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, but up next, Patrick Christys continues our rolling news coverage with GB News Live.
We are GB News. And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.